The scalpel slipped from her fingers and clattered against the sterile tray. Dr. Ryan Holt didn't bother hiding his disgust as he watched the pale nurse fumble to retrieve it, her hands shaking like autumn leaves in a storm. "Jesus Christ, Carter," he muttered, loud enough for the entire OR to hear. "Maybe try not killing someone today." The surgical team snickered. Emily Carter's face flushed red, but she said nothing, just gripped the instrument tighter and stepped back into position, eyes down, shoulders hunched like she was trying to disappear into the tile floor. She looked exactly like what everyone at Silvergate Medical Center believed her to be, a washed-up nobody who barely belonged in scrubs, let alone an operating room. But 60 seconds later, the building shook, not from an earthquake, from the rotor wash of 3 Blackhawk helicopters descending onto the helipad like angels of war. The double doors to the ER exploded open, and suddenly the pristine white hallways were drowning in blood, smoke, and the screams of dying soldiers. A decorated admiral in full dress uniform stumbled through the chaos, his medals catching the fluorescent light, his eyes scanning the room with frantic precision. Then he saw her. His face went ghost white. He pointed one trembling finger directly at the mousy nurse everyone had just mocked, and his voice cracked like breaking glass. "Valkyrie, you survived. Before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. Stay until the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button if you want justice served cold." Now let's get into it. Emily Carter had perfected the art of being invisible. It wasn't something she'd learned in nursing school or picked up during her first month at Silvergate Medical Center. It was older than that, deeper. The kind of skill you acquired when survival meant keeping your head down, your voice quiet, and your past buried so far beneath the surface that even you could almost forget it existed. Almost. She moved through the sterile corridors of Denver's second-largest trauma hospital like a ghost. Silent footfalls, downcast eyes, a posture that screamed, "Please don't notice me." Her scrubs hung loose on a frame that seemed too fragile for the 12-hour shifts and the relentless grind of emergency medicine. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the dark circles beneath her eyes told a story of sleepless nights that no one bothered to ask about. Most people assumed she was incompetent. Some thought she was lazy. A few whispered that she'd gotten the job through some bureaucratic fluke, maybe a diversity hire gone wrong. No one suspected the truth because the truth was impossible. The truth was buried in classified files and unmarked graves halfway across the world. "Carter, Trauma Bay 3 now!" The bark came from Dr. Ryan Holt, 38 years old, and convinced he was the second coming of every surgical legend who'd ever held a scalpel. He stood in the hallway outside the nurse's station, arms crossed, jaw set in that permanent expression of irritation he reserved especially for her. Tall, square-jawed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly afraid of anything in his entire privileged life. His white coat was pristine. His loafers probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. She hurried toward him without a word, clutching a patient chart against her chest like a shield. "I said now, Carter. What part of that is confusing to you?" Holt didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and strode toward the trauma bay, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Behind him, Emily's hands tightened on the chart until her knuckles went white. She followed. Trauma Bay 3 smelled like disinfectant and fear. A 17-year-old kid lay on the gurney, his face a mess of bruises and split skin from a motorcycle accident. His left arm bent at an angle that made Emily's stomach turn. Compound fracture, radius, and ulna both shattered. The bone jutted through the skin like jagged ivory. He was conscious, gasping, eyes rolling with pain and terror. "Talk to me," Holt snapped at the attending nurse, a veteran named Maria Gonzalez, who'd been working trauma for 15 years and had seen things that would make most people quit medicine entirely. 17-year-old male, motorcycle versus sedan, no helmet, GCS 15, vital stable, but he's losing blood fast from the arm. Ortho's on the way, but they're 20 minutes out. Maria's voice was calm, clinical, the tone of someone who'd learned long ago that panic killed patients faster than injuries. Holt moved to the gurney, already reaching for gloves. "Carter, get me a vascular tray. This bleeder needs clamping before he codes." Emily moved on autopilot, pulling supplies from the cabinet, setting up the sterile field. Her hands were steady now. They always were when it mattered. But she kept them low, kept her movements small and unobtrusive. Invisible. You planning to stand there all day or actually help? Holt's voice cut through the room like a whip. He was leaning over the kid, irrigating the wound, his eyes flicking up to glare at Emily. Jesus, Gonzalez, where did they even find this one? She moves like she's sedated. Maria didn't respond. She'd learned that engaging with Holt's commentary only encouraged him. Emily stepped forward with the clamp. Holt snatched it from her hand without a thank you, without even looking at her face. Hold retraction, he ordered, and try not to faint. I don't have time to catch you if you drop. She positioned the retractor, pulling back tissue to expose the severed artery. Blood welled up, dark and fast, and the kid's breathing hitched into a strangled sob. Holt worked quickly, clamping the vessel, but his elbow knocked into Emily's shoulder, and she had to adjust her grip. The retractor slipped half an inch. Steady, Holt snarled. For God's sake, Carter, this isn't rocket science. Just hold the damn thing still. Emily bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just adjusted her position and held the retractor exactly where it needed to be, her arms locked, her breathing shallow. The minutes crawled by. Holt sutured the artery, packed the wound, and finally stepped back, stripping off his gloves with a satisfied snap. Ortho can take it from here, he said to Maria. Then, without sparing Emily a glance, he added, Carter, clean this up. And next time, maybe practice holding things steady at home. Use soup cans or something. The room went silent except for the kid's ragged breathing and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Maria's eyes flicked to Emily, something like sympathy passing across her face, but she didn't say anything. No one ever did. Emily began gathering the bloodied instruments, her hands moving with the same quiet efficiency that everyone mistook for weakness. She didn't look up. She didn't react. She just did the work, because that was all she'd been doing for the past 3 years, surviving, invisible, one shift at a time. The break room coffee tasted like burned rubber, but Emily drank it anyway. She sat in the corner, away from the clusters of nurses and residents swapping war stories and complaints about inadequate staffing and impossible patient loads. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made everyone look half dead. Someone had left a box of stale donuts on the counter. No one was touching them. You know he's full of it, right? Emily looked up. Marcus Reed stood in the doorway, a fresh cup of coffee in each hand. He was 31, fresh out of residency at Johns Hopkins, and still carried himself like someone who believed medicine was supposed to be noble. His dark skin was smooth, his eyes warm, and he had the kind of smile that made patients trust him instantly. He crossed the room and set one of the cups in front of her. I didn't ask for this, Emily said quietly. I know, but you looked like you needed it more than I did. Marcus pulled up a chair, sitting down even though she hadn't invited him. Holt's a piece of work. He treats everyone like garbage, but he seems to have a special kind of contempt for you. Emily wrapped her hands around the fresh cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. I'm used to it. That's the problem, Marcus said. You shouldn't have to be. He paused, studying her face. Where'd you train? I don't think you've ever said. The question landed like a punch to the sternum. Emily's throat tightened. She took a sip of coffee to buy herself time, scalding her tongue in the process. Small program, she said finally. You wouldn't have heard of it. Try me. It doesn't matter. I'm here now. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You're good, you know. I've seen you work. You don't panic. You don't freeze. You just do the job. That's rare, especially for someone who's only been here 6 months. Emily didn't know what to say to that. Compliments felt like traps. They made you visible, and visibility was dangerous. She settled for a non-committal shrug. I'm serious, Marcus continued. I watched you handle that septic patient last week, the one who came in crashing from necrotizing fasciitis. You caught the diagnosis before any of the attendings did. That saved his life. I was just doing my job. Most people would have missed it. Marcus took a sip of his own coffee, grimacing at the taste. You've got instincts. The kind you don't learn from textbooks. Where does that come from? Kandahar, Helmand Province, a field hospital that didn't exist on any official map. where 18-year-old kids bled out on canvas cots while mortars shook dust from the ceiling and she worked by flashlight because the generators had been blown to scrap. That's where it came from. But Emily couldn't say that. She couldn't say any of it. Experience, she said instead. Marcus opened his mouth to ask another question, but the PA system crackled to life, cutting him off. All available personnel to the ER, mass casualty event. Repeat, all available personnel to the ER immediately. The words hung in the air for half a second before the room exploded into motion. Marcus was on his feet instantly, coffee forgotten, already moving toward the door. Emily followed, her heart rate kicking up, adrenaline beginning to flood her system. Mass casualty meant chaos. It meant blood and screaming and decisions made in split seconds that determined who lived and who didn't. She'd been here before. Different hospital, different city, different life. But the rhythm was the same. The ER was already descending into controlled chaos by the time they arrived. Gurneys lined the hallways. Nurses ran in every direction, grabbing supplies, prepping trauma bays, shouting updates to each other. The smell hit Emily first, antiseptic and blood and something else, something chemical and burnt that she couldn't immediately identify. "What happened?" Marcus called out to the charge nurse, a stocky woman named Diane who'd been running the ER for 20 years and had seen everything short of an actual war zone. "Training accident at Fort Carson," Diane said, her voice clipped and efficient. "Live fire exercise went sideways. We've got multiple GSWs, blast injuries, possible traumatic amputations. They're flying them in now." Emily's blood turned to ice. Fort Carson. Military. That meant soldiers. That meant... The building shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was rotor wash, heavy, deep, the kind that rattled windows and set off car alarms in the parking lot. Emily knew that sound. She'd fallen asleep to it and woken up to it and worked through it while artillery fire turned the horizon orange. Blackhawks. Multiple birds coming in fast and low. The emergency entrance doors slammed open and the first wave hit. They came in like a flood. Soldiers in blood-soaked ACS, some walking with help, others carried on stretchers by their squad mates, all of them screaming or silent in that terrible way that meant shock had locked their vocal cords. The smell intensified. Cordite, diesel fuel, burning flesh, the coppery tang of fresh arterial blood. Emily's body moved before her brain caught up. She grabbed gloves from the nearest dispenser, snapping them on as she ran toward the closest gurney. The soldier on it couldn't have been older than 22. His left leg was gone below the knee, the stump wrapped in a hasty tourniquet that was already soaked through. His face was gray, eyes unfocused, lips moving soundlessly. Emily's hands went to the tourniquet, checking the tension, assessing the blood loss. "I need pressure dressings and hemostatic gauze," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise with a clarity that surprised even her. A nurse she didn't recognize appeared at her elbow with the supplies. Emily worked fast, repacking the wound, applying fresh dressings, her movements precise and economical. The soldier's vitals were borderline, blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing. He needed surgery. Now. "Get him to OR2, Emily said. "Tell them probable femoral artery involvement, massive blood loss. He needs a vascular surgeon 5 minutes ago." The nurse stared at her. You're just a floor nurse. You can't..." "Move him. Now." Something in Emily's voice made the nurse obey. They wheeled the gurney away at a run, and Emily was already turning to the next patient, her hands already reaching, her mind already processing injuries and probabilities, and the terrible calculus of triage. Around her, the ER had transformed into something that looked more like a combat zone than a civilian hospital. Blood pooled on the floor. Discarded bandages piled up in corners. Someone was screaming about a sucking chest wound. Someone else was calling for more IV fluids. The overhead lights flickered as the electrical system struggled to keep up with the sudden demand. Emily moved through it like water, slipping between gurneys, assessing injuries with a glance, barking orders to nurses who outranked her but obeyed anyway because her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. She packed a shrapnel wound. She placed a chest tube. She talked a terrified private through a panic attack while simultaneously checking his pupils for signs of traumatic brain injury. And then she heard Holt. "Carter, get over here." He was in Trauma Bay 1, bent over a soldier whose chest was split open, blood everywhere, his hands buried in the thoracic cavity. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temples, and for the first time since Emily had met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. She crossed the room in 3 strides. The soldier on the table was coding. The monitors screamed. His heart was struggling, the rhythm erratic, and there was blood filling his chest cavity faster than Holt could suction it out. Tension pneumothorax, Emily's brain supplied instantly. Right side. The lung had collapsed and was pressing against the heart, cutting off circulation. I need you to hold him steady while I... Holt started, but Emily wasn't listening. She picked up a scalpel from the instrument tray. What the hell are you doing? Holt demanded. Emily didn't answer. She made a quick incision between the 4th and 5th ribs, her hand steady, her movements controlled. Holt stepped back, his mouth hanging open, as she inserted her fingers into the incision, feeling for the pleural space. There. She grabbed a chest tube from the tray. Holt had already laid one out but hadn't used it, and threaded it into the cavity with a smooth, practiced motion. Air hissed out, the pressure released. The soldier's oxygen saturation jumped from 74 to 92 in the span of 10 seconds. Emily stepped back, stripping off her gloves. Suture the insertion site and get him to the ICU. He'll need a thoracic surgeon to check for additional injuries, but he's stable for now. Holt stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings and flown around the room. Where did you learn to... There's another one crashing in Bay 4, Emily said, cutting him off. You should probably go. She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs, adrenaline singing through her veins. That was too much, too visible. She'd just shown Holt, shown everyone, that she was capable of things that a civilian floor nurse had no business knowing how to do. But there was no time to worry about that now. The ER was still drowning in casualties, and people were still dying. She worked for another 40 minutes straight, moving from patient to patient, her hands and mind operating on pure muscle memory. She didn't think. She didn't question. She just acted, because thinking led to hesitation, and hesitation led to body bags. And then the doors opened again. This time it wasn't soldiers. It was brass. Admiral Richard Langford entered the ER like he was walking onto a ship's deck, his posture ramrod straight, his dress uniform immaculate despite the chaos surrounding him. He was 63, silver-haired, with pale blue eyes that had stared down warlords and diplomats and enemy combatants in a dozen different theaters of war. Ribbons and medals covered his chest. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Defense Distinguished Service Medal, others that Emily recognized from a life she'd tried to forget. 3 junior officers flanked him, moving in perfect formation, their expressions unreadable. Langford's eyes swept the ER, taking in the blood-slicked floors, the overwhelmed staff, the soldiers who were still being worked on. His jaw tightened. He started to speak, probably to demand a status report from whoever was in charge. And then he saw her. Emily was bent over a soldier's arm, suturing a deep laceration that had severed muscle and tendon. Her hair had come loose from its tie, falling in dark strands around her face. Her scrubs were soaked with blood, some of it dried to a rusty brown, some of it still wet and red. She was focused, her hands moving with mechanical precision, tying off the last stitch. Langford froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. One hand came up slowly, trembling, his index finger extending to point directly at her. Valkyrie, he breathed. The word cut through the noise of the ER like a blade through silk. Conversations died. Heads turned. Emily's hands stopped moving, the needle suspended in midair, thread dangling. She looked up slowly, and her eyes met Langford's across the blood-soaked chaos. For 3 years, Emily Carter had been invisible. A ghost. A nobody. But Lieutenant Emily Carter, call sign Valkyrie, had been dead. Killed in action. Her name was on a memorial wall at Fort Bragg. Her service record was sealed. Her body was supposed to be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Afghan desert. And yet, here she was. Alive. Breathing. Standing in the middle of a civilian ER with blood on her hands and a past that had just walked through the door and called her by a name no one was supposed to know. Langford took a step forward, his boots clicking against the tile. Lieutenant Carter, he said, his voice stronger now, carrying the weight of command that had sent men into combat and brought them home again. "That's an order. Report." Emily's jaw tightened. Every eye in the ER was on her now. Holt stood frozen in the doorway of Trauma Bay 2. Marcus had stopped mid-stride, a bag of IV fluids dangling from his hand. Diane, the charge nurse, looked like someone had just told her the laws of physics had been repealed. Emily set down the suture needle carefully, precisely, and straightened to her full height. When she spoke, her voice was different. Not the soft, hesitant murmur everyone at Silvergate had grown used to. This voice was sharp, clear, the voice of someone who'd given orders under fire and expected them to be followed. 8 critical casualties stabilized, she said. 2 require immediate surgical intervention for vascular injuries. 3 need thoracic surgery for blast trauma. 1 probable TBI needs a CT scan before we can clear him. The rest are stable enough for transport to the ICU or step-down units. She paused. "Sir." The word landed like a bomb. Langford's expression shifted from shock to something harder, more calculating. He glanced at the junior officers flanking him, then back to Emily. How long have you been? He stopped, shaking his head. "We need to talk. Privately." "I'm in the middle of patient care," Emily said. "Then delegate." It wasn't a request. Emily's hands curled into fists at her sides. Around her, the ER had gone silent. Even the monitors seemed to have muted themselves, as if the entire hospital was holding its breath. She could feel Holt's stare burning into the side of her head. She could sense the confusion, the questions, the sudden recalibration happening in everyone's minds as they tried to reconcile the timid floor nurse they'd dismissed with the woman standing in front of an admiral and holding her ground. "Maria," Emily said, not taking her eyes off Langford, "finish the sutures on the patient in Bay 6. Marcus, check on the GSW in Bay 3. Make sure the packing is holding. Diane, we need a status update on OR availability. Now." They moved. Not because Emily outranked them, she didn't, but because her voice carried the kind of authority that bypassed organizational charts and went straight to something deeper, something primal. The voice of someone who knew what they were doing and didn't have time for debate. Langford nodded toward the hallway. "Conference room, 5 minutes." He turned and walked away, the junior officers following in his wake. Emily stood rooted to the spot, her heart racing, her mind spinning through scenarios and contingencies and exit strategies. This was it. The moment she'd been running from for 3 years, the moment when the past stopped being past and became present tense, immediate, and unavoidable. She stripped off her gloves and followed. The conference room was small and windowless, with a table that could seat maybe 8 people and a whiteboard covered in half-erased notes about patient flow optimization. Langford stood at the far end of the table, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. The junior officers had taken positions by the door, not blocking it exactly, but making it clear that leaving would require going through them. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "Say what you came to say." Langford studied her for a long moment. "We thought you were dead." "I know. The compound was hit. We pulled bodies from the rubble, DNA matches, dental records, everything checked out." "I know that too." "Then how—" Langford's voice cracked, just slightly. He took a breath, steadied himself. "How are you standing here?" Emily's eyes were flat, empty of everything except a cold, hard awareness that had kept her alive when alive should have been impossible. "You want the long version or the short one?" "I want the truth." "The truth," Emily said slowly, "is that someone wanted me dead. Someone with enough pull to fake DNA evidence and bury the paperwork deep enough that it would never surface. Someone who knew I'd seen things I wasn't supposed to see and documented things I wasn't supposed to document." She paused. "The truth is that I barely made it out of that compound alive, and the only reason I survived was because I stopped being Lieutenant Carter and became nobody." Langford's jaw worked. "You're talking about the medical supply scandal, the one you reported." "The one I tried to report," Emily corrected. "The one that got buried along with everyone who knew about it." 3 years ago, Emily had been stationed at a forward operating base in Kandahar, working as a trauma medic attached to a special operations unit. She'd discovered that someone was diverting critical medical supplies, antibiotics, pain medications, surgical instruments, and selling them on the black market. Soldiers were dying from infections that should have been treatable. Operations were being performed with substandard equipment. And when Emily had tried to go through official channels, when she'd documented everything and prepared a formal complaint, the compound had been hit by what was officially labeled a Taliban rocket attack. Except Emily had seen the ordnance. She'd recognized the fragmentation pattern. It wasn't Taliban. It was American. Director Kane, Emily said quietly. He was running the whole operation, skimming supplies, selling them to contractors, pocketing millions while soldiers died. And when I figured it out, he tried to erase me. Langford's face had gone pale again. Marcus Kane? Defense Intelligence? The same. That's an extremely serious accusation. It's the truth. Emily pushed off the door, taking a step toward the table. And before you ask, no, I don't have proof. Not anymore. Everything I had was destroyed in the blast. The only reason I'm alive is because I was outside the compound when it hit, treating a soldier who'd been injured in a training accident. By the time I got back, there was nothing left but rubble and bodies. And you just disappeared. What else was I supposed to do? Emily's voice was sharp now, anger bleeding through the carefully maintained control. The man who tried to kill me is one of the most powerful figures in defense intelligence. I had no evidence, no allies, and a target on my back. So yes, I disappeared. I became Emily Carter, civilian nurse, and I kept my head down and my mouth shut because that was the only way to stay alive. Langford was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, careful. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying I don't believe you, but this is significant, then we need to bring this to the appropriate authorities. Inspector General? Maybe Justice Department. And what happens to me when Kane finds out I'm still alive? Emily asked. You think he's just going to let it go? The man orchestrated a strike on a military compound to cover his tracks. You think he'll hesitate to finish the job? We can protect you. Like you protected me last time? The words came out harsher than Emily intended, but she didn't take them back. No, I've been protecting myself for 3 years and I'm still breathing. That's more than I can say for the 12 people who died in that compound. Langford's expression hardened. Lieutenant, I understand your position, but you can't just... The door burst open. One of the junior officers, a young captain with close-cropped hair and wide eyes, stood in the doorway, breathing hard. Sir, we have a situation. What kind of situation? Langford demanded. Armed individuals just entered the hospital, ground floor moving toward the ER. Security's trying to lock down the building, but... The captain's radio crackled, and a voice screamed through the static. Shots fired! Shots fired in the main lobby! We need backup now! The world tilted sideways. Emily's body reacted before her mind caught up. She was moving, pushing past the captain, running toward the sound of gunfire, her hands already reaching for tools that weren't there because she wasn't in a war zone. She was in a hospital, and hospitals didn't have weapons, didn't have cover, didn't have... The lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in half a second later, bathing the hallways in dim red light. Somewhere in the distance, someone was screaming. The PA system crackled and Diane's voice came through, tight with barely controlled panic. Code Silver, active shooter, all personnel shelter in place. Repeat, Code Silver. Emily skidded to a stop at the intersection of 2 hallways, her heart slamming against her ribs. Behind her, Langford and the officers were shouting into radios, coordinating with whatever security forces they had on hand. In front of her, the hallway stretched toward the ER, dark and empty and silent except for the distant sound of gunfire. This wasn't random. Random shooters didn't hit hospitals during mass casualty events. Random shooters didn't coordinate with power outages. This was targeted. And Emily knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like ice, exactly who the target was. She pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard, her mind racing through options. She could run, find an exit, disappear into the city, become invisible again. Or she could go back to the ER, where dozens of wounded soldiers were lying helpless in the dark, unable to move, unable to defend themselves. Not soldiers. Patients. Her patients. Emily's hands stopped shaking. She turned and ran toward the ER, toward the gunfire, toward the chaos. Because 3 years ago, she'd failed to save the people in that compound. 3 years ago, she'd survived while everyone else died. But not today. Not here. Not again. The ER doors hung crooked on their hinges. One of them punched through with bullet holes that let thin beams of red emergency light slice through the smoke. Emily hit the door frame low and fast, her shoulder connecting with metal hard enough to send pain shooting down her arm. She didn't slow. Inside, the darkness was thick and choking, cut only by the crimson glow of battery-powered exit signs and the stuttering overhead strips that the generators couldn't quite keep alive. Someone was crying. Low, hitching sobs that came from somewhere near the nurses' station. Emily's eyes adjusted fast. Years of operating in blacked-out field hospitals had taught her how to see in almost nothing. The ER had transformed into something unrecognizable. Gurneys overturned, IV stands knocked sideways, medical supplies scattered across the floor like shrapnel. And everywhere, patients. The soldiers from Fort Carson, most of them still too injured to move, lying where they'd been left when the lights died and chaos erupted. "Carter!" Marcus emerged from behind an overturned crash cart, his white coat torn at the shoulder, a cut above his left eye bleeding down the side of his face. He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her behind cover. "What the hell is happening? Security's saying there are armed men in the building, but that doesn't make any—" Gunfire erupted somewhere on the floor above them. Automatic weapons, short controlled bursts, not the panicked spray of an amateur, professional, tactical. Emily's blood turned cold. How many entrances to this wing? What? How many ways in? Her voice was sharp now, the officer's voice that Langford had heard, stripped of anything soft or uncertain. "Marcus, focus. How many entrances?" He blinked, processing. 3. Main doors we just came through, the ambulance bay on the east side, and the surgical corridor that connects to the main hospital. Where are the soldiers? The critical ones who can't move? Most are still in the trauma bays. We were in the middle of stabilizing them when the power— Get everyone who can walk into the surgical corridor. Lock it down from the inside. Find something heavy and barricade the door. Marcus stared at her. "You're talking like this is a siege." "It is." Emily released his arm and moved toward the nearest trauma bay, keeping low, using the overturned furniture for cover. "And we have maybe 3 minutes before they breach this room." "Who's they, Carter? What do you know that you're not 3 minutes, Marcus, move." He hesitated for half a second, then turned and started grabbing nurses, whispering urgent instructions. Emily reached Trauma Bay 2 and found the young soldier with the amputated legs still on the gurney, his face gray with shock, eyes glassy. He'd been sedated, but not enough, and pain was starting to break through the drugs. "Hey," Emily said quietly, crouching beside him. "What's your name?" "Private Owens," he managed. "James Owens." "Okay, James, I need you to stay quiet and stay still. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, teeth chattering. Emily checked his vitals quickly, pulse thready but present, blood pressure holding. He'd live if she could keep him from bleeding out or going into shock. She grabbed 2 bags of IV fluids from a supply cart and hung them on the gurney's pole, opening both lines to maximum flow. Volume replacement. Basic combat medicine. Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Ground floor, maybe 50 yards away. Emily's hands moved faster. She reinforced the dressing on Owen's stump, added another tourniquet above the first as backup, then pulled a blanket over him. "Don't move. Don't make a sound. Someone comes through that door who isn't me or another hospital staff. You play dead. Understand?" Who's coming?" "Doesn't matter. Just stay down." She moved to the next bay, then the next. Working in the dark, her fingers identifying supplies by touch, her mind calculating angles and sightlines and how long it would take armed men to sweep a room this size. 4 more soldiers, all critical, all immobile. She did what she could, secured their lines, made sure they were breathing, whispered the same instructions to the ones who were conscious enough to understand. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. Moving with purpose. Emily dropped behind a supply cabinet, her heart hammering. Through the gap between the cabinet and the wall, she could see the ER entrance. Shadows moved across the broken doors. 3 figures, maybe 4, silhouetted against the red emergency lighting from the corridor beyond. They moved like soldiers, smooth, coordinated, weapons up and ready. One of them spoke, voice low and clipped. "Sweep and clear." Target is female, mid-30s, dark hair. Anyone gets in the way, they're collateral. Target. They weren't here for a robbery. They weren't here to make a statement. They were here for her. Emily's mind raced. Kane. It had to be. Langford's appearance had triggered something, maybe a surveillance flag, maybe just bad timing. Either way, Kane knew she was alive, knew she was here, and he'd sent a kill team to finish what the airstrike had started 3 years ago. The men entered the ER. They fanned out immediately, 2 going left toward the trauma bays, 1 staying at the entrance as rear security, another moving toward the nurses' station. Emily could see their profiles now in the dim red light, tactical gear, suppressed rifles, night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets, not using the NVGs because the emergency lights would white them out. Good tradecraft, expensive equipment, definitely not random shooters. The lead man reached Trauma Bay 1 and swept it with his weapon, the suppressed barrel tracking across empty space. He moved to Bay 2. Owens was there, still and silent under his blanket, playing dead like Emily had told him. The shooter paused, raised his rifle. Emily's body moved before her brain caught up. She grabbed a metal IV stand from beside the cabinet and hurled it across the room. It hit the floor with a tremendous crash, clattering and rolling, drawing every eye and every weapon toward the sound. Then she ran. Not away from them. Toward them. The element of surprise bought her 2 seconds. She closed the distance to the nearest shooter in 3 strides, coming in low and fast from his blind side. Her shoulder hit his midsection like a battering ram, driving the air from his lungs and knocking him backward into a crash cart. His rifle clattered to the floor. Emily didn't go for it. She drove her elbow into his throat, not hard enough to crush his windpipe, but hard enough to make him gag and double over. "Contact!" one of the others shouted. Muzzle flash lit the darkness. Suppressed rounds punched through the air where Emily had been standing half a second earlier, embedding in the wall with muffled thumps. She was already moving, rolling behind the nurse's station, her hands searching for anything she could use. Her fingers closed on a fire extinguisher mounted to the wall. She ripped it free, popped the pin, and came up swinging. White foam exploded across the room, filling the air with a thick chemical cloud that turned the red emergency lighting into a hellish fog. The shooters cursed, their visibility cut to nothing. Emily used the chaos to move again, sliding across the floor on her hip, reaching the rifle the first man had dropped. She grabbed it and kept moving, disappearing into the smoke before anyone could get a bead on her. Behind the cover of an overturned gurney, Emily checked the rifle. HK 416, short barrel, suppressor, 30-round magazine. 14 rounds left. She'd fired these before, thousands of times, on ranges and in live combat. The weight was familiar. The balance was right. But her hands were shaking again, and this time it wasn't an act. She was in a hospital, a civilian hospital. There were patients everywhere, injured soldiers who couldn't defend themselves, nurses and doctors who'd signed up to save lives, not to get caught in a firefight. "Fall back!" The lead shooter's voice cut through the chaos. "Regroup at the entrance. She's armed." The foam was starting to settle, visibility improving. Emily could see shapes moving through the haze, pulling back toward the doors. They were adapting, regrouping. Professionals didn't panic. They adjusted and came at you from a different angle. She had maybe 30 seconds before they flanked her or called for backup. Emily's eyes tracked to the ambulance bay exit on the east side of the ER, 20 feet away. The door was closed but not locked. If she could reach it, she could lead them away from the patients, away from the people who couldn't fight back. She took a breath and ran. Gunfire followed her immediately. Rounds sparked off the tile floor, punched through drywall, shattered the glass of a supply cabinet. Emily hit the ambulance bay door at full speed, slammed the release bar, and tumbled through into the night air beyond. The cold hit her like a fist. Denver in April was still cold, especially at night, and she was soaked in sweat and blood. She stumbled, caught herself against the brick wall of the building, and scanned the ambulance bay. Empty. No vehicles. Just a loading dock and a narrow access road that led to the main parking lot. Sodium lights overhead cast everything in harsh orange. Too much exposure, no cover. Behind her, the door burst open. Emily ran again, sprinting across the loading dock toward a row of dumpsters that lined the access road. She made it 3/4 of the way before a round cracked past her head, so close she felt the displaced air. She dove, hit the asphalt hard, rolled behind the nearest dumpster as more rounds hammered into the metal, punching holes that let orange light stream through. Two shooters in the bay doorway, both advancing, moving with confidence because they had the numbers and the firepower and probably assumed she was just a scared nurse who'd gotten lucky grabbing a rifle. They were wrong about that. Emily came around the side of the dumpster and fired 3 rounds in quick succession. Center mass, the textbook way. The first shooter went down hard, his rifle skittering across the pavement. The second dove for cover, returning fire. But his shots went wide because he was moving and Emily was stationary and stability won gunfights. She fired twice more. The second shooter jerked and fell, then the rifle clicked empty. Emily dropped it and ran again, moving deeper into the parking lot, using parked cars for cover. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like they were made of lead. She wasn't 22 anymore, wasn't in combat shape, wasn't... A black SUV roared around the corner of the building, headlights blazing, engine screaming. It fishtailed, rubber burning against asphalt, and slammed to a stop between Emily and the hospital. The back door opened. "Get in!" Langford's voice sharp and commanding. Emily didn't hesitate. She dove into the SUV, and it was moving before the door even closed, tires squealing as it accelerated out of the parking lot and onto the street. She landed hard against the back seat, gasping, her vision swimming with adrenaline and exhaustion. Langford was in the front passenger seat, one of his junior officers driving. Another officer sat beside Emily in the back, rifle at the ready, eyes scanning for pursuit. "You're bleeding," Langford said. Emily looked down. Her scrubs were shredded at the knee, blood soaking through. She didn't remember getting hit, probably scraped it during one of the dives. Didn't matter. "Where are we going?" she managed. "Somewhere safe." Nowhere safe. Not while Kane's still breathing. Langford turned in his seat to look at her, his expression grim. "You were right. I made some calls while that was happening. Reached out to people I trust at Defense Intelligence. Asked some very careful questions about Marcus Kane. And I got stonewalled. Every single contact I have either refused to talk or gave me the bureaucratic runaround. That doesn't happen unless someone very powerful is running interference." He paused. "Which means your story checks out. Which means we have a serious problem." The SUV turned onto the highway, merging into sparse late-night traffic. The driver, a Marine captain named Reeves, according to his name tape, was driving fast but not recklessly, staying just under the speed limit, keeping them invisible. "The soldiers at the hospital," Emily said. "The patients, are they?" "Secure," Langford assured her. "I had my team lock down the ER after you left. Hospital security's working with local PD to clear the building. Your people, the nurses and doctors, they got everyone who could move into a safe room. No civilian casualties." Emily leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. No civilian casualties. Small mercies. "The shooters?" she asked. "2 dead in the ambulance bay. The others scattered when emergency response arrived. We'll find them." "No, you won't." Emily opened her eyes. "Kane's not stupid. Those men were contractors, probably foreign nationals with no official ties to U.S. intelligence. By tomorrow morning, they'll be on flights out of the country or buried in unmarked graves. You won't find anything that connects them to Kane." "Then we need to make him come to us," Langford said. Emily laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "He already came for me. Twice, and both times I barely survived. I'm not talking about defense, I'm talking about offense." Langford pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then put it away. "I've been in this business for 40 years, Lieutenant. I've dealt with men like Kane before, men who think they're untouchable because they've spent their careers operating in the shadows. They all have one weakness." "What's that?" "They can't stand being exposed." Langford's eyes were hard, cold, the eyes of a man who'd given orders that had ended lives and slept fine afterward. "We're going to drag Marcus Kane into the light, and then we're going to watch him burn." The safe house was a nondescript ranch-style property in Lakewood, 40 minutes outside Denver, hidden at the end of a long gravel driveway and surrounded by pine trees. The kind of place that intelligence agencies used for debriefings and protective custody, sterile and temporary. Emily sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee going cold in front of her, while Langford paced and made phone calls in the next room. The other officer, a young lieutenant named Sarah Briggs, sat across from Emily, ostensibly standing guard, but mostly just looking uncomfortable. She had brown hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp green eyes, and the lean build of someone who ran 10 miles a day without breaking a sweat. "You doing okay?" Briggs asked after the silence had stretched too long. Emily shrugged. "Define okay?" "Fair point." Briggs glanced toward the doorway where Langford's voice rose and fell in urgent, clipped sentences. "For what it's worth, I think what you did tonight was incredible. Taking on armed contractors with just—" She gestured vaguely. "I mean, most people would have hidden." "I did hide," Emily said quietly, "for 3 years. But you came back when it mattered." "I didn't have a choice." Briggs leaned forward. "There's always a choice. You could have run. Instead, you went straight toward the gunfire. That's not nothing." Emily didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She just wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and stared at the table, her mind replaying the firefight in endless loops. The weight of the rifle, the recoil, the way the first shooter had fallen. She'd killed before, in combat, in defense of her unit, in situations where the rules of engagement were clear and the targets were enemy combatants. But those men in the hospital hadn't been wearing uniforms. They'd been in a civilian building, and she'd shot them anyway. Necessary. It had been necessary. She kept telling herself that. Langford returned to the kitchen, his phone in one hand, his expression unreadable. "We've got movement," he said without preamble. "I called in some favors. Reached out to a contact at the FBI. Someone I served with back in Desert Storm. Someone who owes me and who I trust completely. Told him everything you told me about Kane and the supply scandal." "And?" Emily asked. "And he's interested. Very interested. Apparently, there's already an ongoing investigation into irregularities in defense intelligence procurement contracts. Nothing concrete yet, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Your testimony could be the catalyst they need." "My testimony's worthless without evidence," Emily pointed out. "Everything I had was destroyed. It's my word against Kane's, and Kane has 4 decades of service and a spotless record. I'm a dead woman who faked her own survival. Guess which one of us a jury's going to believe?" "That's why we're not going to a jury." "Not yet." Langford sat down across from her, his posture radiating controlled intensity. "We're going to force Kane to make a mistake. We're going to make him think you're vulnerable, that you're isolated, and we're going to bait him into coming after you again. Except this time, we'll be ready. We'll have surveillance, we'll have backup, and we'll catch him red-handed." Emily stared at him. "You want to use me as bait. I want to give you a chance at justice." "Those aren't the same thing." "No," Langford admitted. "They're not, but it's the best option we have." He leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Look, I get it. You've been running for 3 years, and now I'm asking you to stand still and let the wolves circle. It's a terrible plan, and if I were in your position, I'd probably tell me to go to hell. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for Kane to send another team, another airstrike, another method of erasing you. At least this way, you control the when and where." Emily's jaw tightened. "And if it goes wrong? If Kane figures out it's a trap? Then we adapt." Langford's voice was steady, certain. "I've run operations in worse circumstances with worse odds. We can do this, but I need you to trust me." Trust. Emily turned the word over in her mind, examining it from every angle. She didn't trust easily anymore. Trust was how you got killed. Trust was what got 12 people blown apart in a field hospital because Emily had believed the system would protect her. But Langford wasn't the system. He was a single man with his own agenda and his own risks. And despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the voice in her head screaming at her to run, Emily found herself nodding. "What do you need me to do?" Langford's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened just slightly. "First, we need to make you visible. Kane thinks you're in the wind, probably assumes you'll disappear again. We're going to prove him wrong. Tomorrow morning, you're going back to Silvergate." "You're insane. I'm strategic. You go back to work like nothing happened. Business as usual. But this time you'll have protection. Undercover agents, surveillance, the whole package. Kane will see that you're not running, that you're confident enough to show your face, and that'll make him nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." "Or nervous people send bigger guns," Emily countered. "Let them. We'll be ready. The rest of the night blurred together in a haze of planning and preparation. Langford's FBI contact, a special agent named Patricia Moss, arrived just after 2 in the morning. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years putting criminals behind bars. She listened to Emily's story without interrupting, taking notes on a tablet, her expression neutral. When Emily finished, Moss set the tablet down and looked at her for a long moment. "You're either telling the truth," Moss said slowly, "or you're the most convincing liar I've ever met." "I'm telling the truth. I believe you, which is why I'm going to help. But I need you to understand something. What we're talking about here is bringing down a senior intelligence official with significant political connections. That's not something that happens quietly or quickly. We need airtight evidence, and we need to move carefully. One wrong step, and Kane walks. Or I die," Emily added. "Or that." Moss didn't sugarcoat it. "I'm not going to lie to you and say this is safe. It's not. But if you're willing to take the risk, I can promise you that we'll do everything in our power to keep you alive and to make sure Kane faces justice." Emily met her gaze. "I'm willing? Then let's get to work." By the time the sun rose over the Rockies, they had a plan. Emily would return to Silvergate Medical Center for her scheduled shift at 7 a.m. FBI agents would be embedded in the hospital as patients, visitors, and maintenance staff. Langford's officers would maintain a perimeter outside. Every entrance would be monitored. Every communication in and out of the building would be tracked, and Emily would go about her day as if she had nothing to fear. The drive back to Denver felt surreal. Emily sat in the back of an unmarked sedan driven by an FBI agent who didn't speak except to confirm navigation. The city woke up around them, commuters filling the highways, coffee shops opening their doors, the ordinary machinery of daily life grinding forward without any awareness of the violence that had erupted just hours earlier. By the time they reached Silvergate, Emily's exhaustion had crossed into a territory beyond tired. She felt hollow, scraped out, running on fumes and stubborn refusal to collapse. The hospital looked normal from the outside. No police tape, no media circus, just the usual flow of ambulances and worried families heading to the ER entrance. "Last chance to change your mind," the FBI agent said as they pulled into the parking lot. Emily shook her head. "I'm good." "Earpiece is in your jacket pocket, button-sized, wireless. Put it in before you go inside. Someone will be listening at all times. You need help. You say the word Valkyrie, and we'll have agents on you in 30 seconds. "Got it." She climbed out of the car and walked toward the employee entrance, her legs moving on autopilot. The earpiece fit snugly, invisible, unless you knew to look for it. She could hear faint static, then a voice. Moss, calm and professional. "Comms check. Carter, if you can hear me, scratch your left ear." Emily scratched her ear. Good. We're live. Proceed as normal. We've got eyes on all entrances." The employee locker room was empty. Emily changed into fresh scrubs. The hospital kept spares for staff who pulled double shifts and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked like hell. Dark circles, pale skin, a cut on her cheek she didn't remember getting, but her hands were steady. She clipped her ID badge to her scrubs and headed to the ER. The shift started quietly, too quietly. Emily moved through her usual routines, checking on patients, updating charts, restocking supplies, but the atmosphere was wrong. The other nurses spoke in hushed tones, casting glances her way when they thought she wasn't looking. Marcus appeared at one point, his face still sporting the bandage over his cut from last night, and pulled her aside. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "I'm working." "Carter, please, 5 minutes." She followed him to an empty consultation room. Marcus closed the door and turned to face her, his expression somewhere between confusion and awe. "Who are you?" he asked. "And don't give me the just a nurse routine. I watched you take down armed men last night. I watched you handle trauma cases like you'd been doing it in war zones. Langford called you lieutenant, so who the hell are you, really?" Emily leaned against the wall, suddenly too tired to maintain the fiction anymore. "Someone who used to save lives in places you've never heard of. Someone who made enemies because I wouldn't look the other way when people were dying for profit. Someone who's been hiding for 3 years because staying visible meant dying." Marcus absorbed that. "And now? Now I'm done hiding." That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. He laughed, a short bark of sound with no real humor. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. And I'm sorry for how Holt treated you, for how we all treated you. We didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. That was the point. Still, you deserved better. Marcus paused. Is it over? The people who came after you last night, are they? No, Emily said quietly. It's not over. Not yet. The rest of the morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every time the ER doors opened, Emily's heart rate spiked. Every unfamiliar face could be a threat. But Moss's voice remained calm in her ear, a steady presence that kept her grounded. Nothing unusual. You're doing great. Just keep breathing. At 11:30, Dr. Holt appeared. He looked like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled, his white coat wrinkled. He spotted Emily at the nurse's station and walked straight toward her, his expression unreadable. Carter. A word. Emily followed him to his office, a cramped space filled with medical journals and half-empty coffee cups. Holt closed the door and stood there for a moment, not speaking, just studying her like she was a specimen under a microscope. I owe you an apology, he said, finally. Emily blinked. What? An apology for how I've treated you, for the things I've said. Holt ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. I watched the security footage from last night. I saw what you did. How you handled those soldiers, how you faced down armed men without hesitating. And I realized I've been a complete ass to someone who's probably forgotten more about emergency medicine than I'll ever know. Emily didn't know what to say. An apology from Holt was so unexpected it didn't feel real. You don't have to, she started. Yes, I do. Holt cut her off. I judged you based on surface impressions. I assumed you were weak because you were quiet, incompetent because you didn't push back when I criticized you. I was wrong, completely, unforgivably wrong. He paused. I don't know your full story, and I'm not going to ask, but I want you to know that you have my respect. And if there's anything I can do to... The lights went out. Not the emergency lights this time. All of them. Complete darkness, sudden and absolute. Carter, we've got a problem. Moss's voice crackled in Emily's ear, tension bleeding through the professional calm. Power's been cut to the entire hospital. Backup generators should kick in, but stand by. They didn't kick in. The darkness held. And in that darkness, Emily heard something that turned her blood to ice. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving through the hospital with purpose and precision. They were inside. Emily's hand shot out in the darkness, grabbing Holt's wrist before he could move. His pulse hammered against her fingers, rapid and panicked. She pulled him down behind his desk, pressing one finger to her lips, even though he couldn't see the gesture. The message was clear enough. He went silent. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, measured, boot heels on linoleum, the distinctive rhythm of people moving in formation. Emily counted at least 6, maybe 8. They were sweeping the floor systematically, clearing rooms the way special operations teams cleared hostile buildings. Moss, Emily whispered, barely audible. How many? Static hissed in her ear. Nothing else. Moss, do you copy? More static than a brief crackle of interference before the connection died completely. The earpiece went silent. They jammed communications. Standard breach protocol. Cut the power, kill the comms, isolate the target. Emily's mind raced through options. Holt's office had one door, no windows. They were trapped unless she moved now, before the sweep reached this corridor. She felt along the desk, her fingers finding Holt's shoulder in the darkness. When I move, you follow, she breathed. Stay low, stay quiet. Don't argue. What's happening? His voice cracked. Later. Move! She opened the door a fraction of an inch. The hallway beyond was black except for thin emergency strips along the baseboards that ran on independent battery power. Barely enough light to see shapes, but not faces. The footsteps were coming from the east wing, still maybe 30 seconds away. West led toward the surgical corridor and the main hospital. That's where the FBI agents would be, assuming they hadn't already been neutralized. Emily pulled Holt into the hallway and moved west, keeping to the wall, her free hand extended to feel for obstacles. Behind them, the footsteps quickened. Someone had heard the door open. Contact, West Corridor! A voice called out, cold and professional. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness. Emily shoved Holt forward and ran, no longer caring about stealth. Speed was survival now. The surgical corridor entrance was 20 feet ahead, the double doors barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. Gunfire erupted behind them. Suppressed rounds cracked past Emily's head and punched into the wall, sending up puffs of drywall dust. She hit the doors at full speed, slamming through them with Holt stumbling behind her. On the other side, she spun and grabbed a crash cart, shoving it against the doors as a barricade. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy seconds. The surgical corridor was longer than the ER wing, lined with operating rooms and prep stations. Empty at this hour, most elective surgeries had been canceled after last night's mass casualty event. Emergency lighting here was slightly better, enough to see 10 feet ahead. "This way!" a voice called from the darkness ahead. Emily's hand went to her waistband reflexively, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. She'd left the rifle in the parking lot last night, and civilian hospitals didn't exactly stock firearms in the supply closets. A figure emerged from one of the operating rooms. Male, dark clothes, moving with purpose. Emily tensed, ready to fight or run, before recognizing the stance. FBI tactical posture. The man raised one hand, palm out, non-threatening. "Carter, Special Agent DeMarco. Moss sent me to extract you when comms went down." "How many hostiles?" Emily demanded. "Unknown. We counted at least 12 entering the building through multiple access points. They cut power to the entire block, not just the hospital. Professional operation." DeMarco glanced past her toward the barricaded doors. "We need to move. My team's establishing a defensive position in OR3. Reinforcements are en route, but ETA is 8 to 10 minutes. 8 to 10 minutes. An eternity in a gunfight. The doors behind them shuddered as something heavy slammed against them. The crash cart groaned, metal scraping against tile. They had maybe 15 seconds before the barricade failed. "Go," Emily said, pushing Holt toward DeMarco. "Get him somewhere safe." "What about you?" Holt asked. "I'm the reason they're here. You're just collateral." She met DeMarco's eyes. "Or 3. I'll be right behind you." DeMarco hesitated, then nodded and grabbed Holt's arm, pulling him down the corridor at a run. Emily turned back to the doors. The crash cart was sliding now, inch by inch, pushed by sheer force from the other side. She looked around, searching for anything useful. A supply cabinet hung open on the wall, surgical instruments, sterile packs, nothing helpful. But below it, a red emergency box. Emily ripped it open. Inside, a fire axe, not ideal, but better than nothing. The doors burst open, the crash cart flying sideways with a metallic screech. 2 men in tactical gear came through fast, weapons up, moving to clear the corridor. Emily was already swinging. The axe caught the first man in the shoulder, not a killing blow, but enough to knock him sideways and make him drop his rifle. She reversed the swing, bringing the blunt end around into the second man's knee. He went down hard, cursing. Emily didn't wait. She grabbed the dropped rifle and ran. Behind her, more footsteps. More voices shouting coordinates and commands. They were pouring into the corridor now, no longer bothering with stealth. This was a full assault. OR3 was at the end of the corridor, doors propped open. Emily covered the distance in seconds, diving through the entrance as rounds chased her, sparking off the metal doorframe. Inside, DeMarco and 2 other agents had set up behind overturned gurneys and equipment carts, creating a makeshift firing position. Holt crouched in the corner, his face white with terror. "Barricade the door," DeMarco ordered. Emily and one of the other agents, a younger man with sergeant stripes on his tactical vest, grabbed a heavy surgical table and dragged it across the entrance. It wouldn't stop bullets, but it would slow entry. "How many rounds you got?" Emily asked, checking the rifle she'd taken. "Half a magazine, maybe 15 rounds. 2 full mags each," DeMarco said, "plus sidearms. Not enough for a sustained engagement." "Then we don't sustain it. We hold until backup arrives and we make every shot count." Emily moved to the window. Reinforced glass, wire mesh embedded. No way to break through quickly. She could see the parking lot below, 3 stories down. Emergency vehicles were arriving, red and blue lights strobing through the darkness. Police. SWAT. But they'd be organizing, establishing perimeters, following protocol. They wouldn't breach until they had a plan. The assault team didn't have to wait. They were already inside. Movement in the corridor. shadows shifting in the dim emergency light. Emily raised the rifle, sighting through the improvised barricade. The targeting felt familiar, muscle memory from 1,000 training drills and too many real engagements. Breathing steady, finger on the trigger, not in the guard. Wait for a clear shot. A flashbang canister arced through the doorway. "Grenade!" someone shouted. Emily turned away and closed her eyes, hands over her ears. The explosion was muffled but still brutal in the enclosed space, a percussive wave that rattled her teeth and sent a high-pitched whine screaming through her skull. Light flared even through her eyelids, white-hot and blinding. Then they came. The first man through the door took 3 rounds from DeMarco before he even cleared the barricade. The second made it 2 steps before Emily shot him twice in the chest. The third was smarter, using the door frame for cover, firing blind around the corner. His rounds went wide, but they forced everyone down, heads low, unable to return effective fire. Emily rolled left, changing position, coming up at a different angle. She put 2 rounds through the door frame where she estimated center mass would be. A grunt. A thud. The firing stopped. "Reloading," DeMarco called out. The sergeant covered him, firing controlled bursts that kept the doorway suppressed. Emily's rifle clicked empty. She dropped it and drew the sidearm from the downed agent beside her. A Glock 19. Familiar weight. 13 rounds in the mag, 1 in the chamber. More grenades. This time they came in clusters, 3 canisters bouncing across the floor, hissing and spewing thick white smoke. Not flashbangs. Tear gas. Emily's eyes immediately started burning. Her throat closed up, lungs rejecting the contaminated air. Around her, the others were coughing, gasping, struggling to see through the chemical fog. The assault team would have masks. They could operate in this environment. The defenders couldn't. "We have to move," Emily choked out. "Fall back to the equipment room." They stumbled through the smoke, half blind, dragging Holt between them. The equipment room was smaller, barely large enough for the 5 of them, but it had a heavy door with an electronic lock. Emily slammed it shut and engaged the bolt. The digital display read "Access denied" in red letters, but the manual lock held. For now. "That won't stop them," the sergeant said, wheezing. His name tape read Morrison. Young face, maybe 26. Combat infantry badge on his vest. He knew what he was talking about. "Doesn't have to stop them," Emily said. "Just has to slow them down long enough for SWAT to breach." "And if SWAT doesn't make it in time?" Emily didn't answer that. She was scanning the equipment room looking for anything useful. Medical supplies, monitoring equipment, a defibrillator, and in the corner, a maintenance access panel. She crossed to it and pulled the panel open. Behind it, a narrow ventilation shaft, maybe 2 feet square, tight but navigable for someone small. It led up into the ceiling, part of the HVAC system. "DeMarco," Emily said, "you know the building layout?" "Basic schematics." "Why?" "This shaft connects to the main ventilation system. It should run above the surgical floor and connect to the central air handling unit on the roof. If we can reach it, we're on the 3rd floor. That's a 60-foot vertical climb through ductwork designed for air, not people." DeMarco shook his head. "Even if we make it, they'll hear us moving. They'll cut us off." "You have a better idea?" Before DeMarco could respond, something heavy slammed against the equipment room door. Once. Twice. Metal groaned. The electronic lock's display flickered. "They're going to breach with explosives," Morrison said flatly. "Shape charge on the hinges. Standard entry technique. We've got maybe 90 seconds. Emily looked at Holt. He was sitting against the wall, knees drawn up, breathing fast and shallow, going into shock. Not combat trained, not equipped for this. "Can you climb?" she asked him. He stared at her. "What?" "The ventilation shaft. Can you climb it?" I don't know. Maybe. I don't. Yes or no, Holt? We don't have time for maybe." He swallowed hard. "Yes." "Then go. Now. Morrison, help him get started. DeMarco, you and your partner follow. I'll cover the door." "Carter, if you stay here, you're dead," DeMarco said. "If I don't stay here, they'll hear you climbing and shoot you through the ceiling. Someone has to keep them occupied." Emily checked the Glock's magazine. 13 rounds. "Get moving." Morrison and Holt were already at the access panel, Morrison boosting Holt up into the shaft. The doctor struggled, his hand slipping on the smooth metal, but he managed to pull himself in and start climbing. Morrison followed, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this kind of thing before. DeMarco grabbed Emily's shoulder. "This is suicide." "It's a delay. There's a difference." She met his eyes. "Get them to the roof. Signal SWAT. Tell them the assault team is approximately 12 strong, heavily armed, professional contractors. And tell Agent Moss that Marcus Kane is behind this. Make sure that gets on record." "You're talking like you won't be there to tell her yourself." Emily smiled, thin and humorless. "Just in case." DeMarco held her gaze for another second, then nodded and moved to the shaft. His partner, a woman named Torres, went up first, followed by DeMarco. The sounds of their climbing faded quickly, absorbed by the insulated ductwork. Emily turned back to the door. It shuddered again, harder this time. The lock's display went dark. They'd cut power to it, probably using an external bypass. Professionals. Kane had sent his best. She moved a metal equipment cart in front of the door, not much cover but better than nothing, and crouched behind it, pistol aimed at the entrance. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The fear was there, cold and sharp in her chest, but she'd learned long ago how to function through fear. It was just another variable to manage. The door exploded inward. Not a shape charge, a battering ram. The door flew off its hinges and crashed into the room, and 3 men came through the opening in a professional stack, weapons up, moving to clear corners. Emily fired. The first man took 2 rounds center mass and went down. The second returned fire, but Emily was already moving, rolling right, coming up behind a different cart. His shots hit where she'd been. She fired 3 times. 1 round caught him in the leg. He dropped, cursing, dragging himself behind cover. The third man was smarter. He stayed in the doorway, using it for cover, not exposing himself. Emily could see his rifle barrel tracking, searching for a target. She waited. Patience in a gunfight was the difference between living and dying. Let him commit. Let him make the mistake. He did. He leaned out just slightly, trying to get an angle on her position. Emily shot him in the throat. He fell backward into the corridor, choking, and suddenly the doorway was empty. Emily used the respite to change position again, moving to the opposite corner of the room. The wounded man was still behind cover, trying to apply pressure to his leg wound with one hand while keeping his rifle up with the other. "Drop it," Emily said quietly. He turned toward her voice, swinging the rifle around. Emily shot him twice more. He stopped moving. Silence fell. Emily's ears rang from the gunfire in the enclosed space. She could taste cordite and smoke. The Glock had 3 rounds left. 3 rounds against however many were still coming. More footsteps in the corridor. They were regrouping, adapting to the fact that their first assault had failed. Emily backed toward the access panel, keeping her eyes on the door. If she could reach the shaft, if she could climb fast enough, a voice called from the corridor. "Lieutenant Carter!" Emily froze. That voice. She knew that voice. A man stepped into the doorway, empty hands raised in a gesture of peace. He was tall, mid-50s, with silver hair cut military short and the kind of face that looked trustworthy on camera. He wore a dark suit, no tactical gear, no weapon visible. Director Marcus Kane. "I'm impressed," he said, his voice calm and conversational, like they were meeting at a conference instead of standing in a room full of bodies. "I really am. Most people would have run. You chose to fight. That takes a certain kind of courage." Emily's pistol didn't waver. "Step back or I shoot you in the face." Kane smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think you will. Not yet. You're too smart. You know that killing me accomplishes nothing. My men would cut you down before my body hit the floor, and all the evidence you've been trying to gather would die with you. I don't need evidence. Langford knows. The FBI knows. You're done." "Am I?" Kane took a step into the room. "Langford's a relic with no real power. The FBI has suspicions, not proof. And you're a dead woman whose testimony is worth exactly nothing because, officially, you don't exist." He spread his hands. "I've spent 40 years building relationships, creating leverage, ensuring that people like me don't face consequences for the hard decisions we make. You think that ends because one disgruntled medic crawls out of a grave?" Emily's finger tightened on the trigger. "Hard decisions. That's what you call stealing medical supplies and letting soldiers die?" "I call it pragmatism. The military budget is finite, resources are limited. I found a way to generate additional funding for operations that Congress wouldn't approve. Some supply shrinkage was inevitable. Shrinkage. Emily's voice was ice. 12 people died in that compound. Soldiers under my care died because we didn't have antibiotics or clean instruments or basic medical supplies. That's not shrinkage. That's murder. Collateral damage, Kane corrected. Unfortunate, but necessary. And none of it matters now because you're going to disappear. Again. Except this time, it'll be permanent. He glanced toward the access panel. Your friends in the ventilation shaft aren't going to make it, by the way. I have a team on the roof, another in the maintenance corridor above you. They're trapped. Emily's heart sank, but she didn't let it show on her face. You're lying. I don't need to lie. I've already won. Kane's expression hardened. Put down the weapon, Lieutenant. You're out of ammunition, out of options, and out of time. Surrender and I'll make it quick. Keep fighting, and I'll make sure it takes hours. Emily glanced at the Glock. 3 rounds. Kane was unarmed, but she could see shadows moving in the corridor behind him. At least 4 men, probably more. If she shot Kane, they'd kill her instantly. If she didn't shoot him, he'd kill her eventually anyway. No good options. She lowered the pistol. Kane nodded, satisfied. Smart choice. Now set it on the... Emily threw the pistol at his face and dove for the access panel. Kane jerked back, hands coming up to protect himself. The pistol caught him on the shoulder, not a hard hit, but enough to make him stumble. Emily was already moving, hauling herself into the ventilation shaft, kicking the panel closed behind her. Gunfire erupted immediately, rounds punching through the thin metal panel, ricocheting inside the shaft. Emily climbed fast, hands and feet finding purchase on the narrow walls, moving up into darkness. Below her, she could hear shouting, orders being given. Get someone in that shaft, now! Emily climbed faster. Her shoulders scraped against the metal. Her knees banged into rivets and seams. The shaft was barely wide enough for her body, and it angled upward at a steep slope that made every movement exhausting. She could hear someone entering below her, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She kept climbing. The shaft opened into a wider horizontal duct after about 20 feet. Emily crawled forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the flashlight beam grew brighter, closer. Voices echoed through the ductwork. I've got visual. She's heading east. Emily reached an intersection where the duct split in 3 directions. She paused, trying to orient herself. The schematics in her head were outdated, based on field hospitals and combat installations, not civilian buildings. She picked the middle route and kept moving. The duct narrowed again, then narrowed further. Emily's shoulders wedged against the sides. She had to exhale completely to squeeze through, wriggling forward inch by inch, metal scraping against her back and chest. Ahead, light. Not artificial light. Daylight. She crawled toward it, desperation overriding exhaustion. The light came from a ventilation grate set into the side of the duct. Through it, she could see the outside wall of the hospital, and below, 3 stories down, the parking lot filled with police vehicles and SWAT teams. Emily grabbed the grate and pulled. It didn't budge. Screwed in from the outside, probably. She braced her feet against the duct walls and pulled harder. The screws groaned but held. Behind her, the flashlight beam was getting closer. She could hear breathing, close and labored. Emily positioned herself and kicked the grate. Once. Twice. On the 3rd kick, 1 screw tore free. On the 4th, another gave way. The grate hung crooked now, half detached. Stop moving! A voice shouted from behind her. Emily looked back. The man in the duct had a pistol raised, trying to aim in the confined space. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She kicked the grate 1 final time. It tore free completely and fell, tumbling down the exterior wall and clattering onto the pavement below. And then Emily threw herself through the opening. For a heartbeat, she was weightless, falling. 3 stories of open air below her, concrete rushing up. Her hands caught the edge of a window ledge on the 2nd floor. The impact nearly ripped her arms from their sockets, pain exploding through her shoulders. She hung there, fingers digging into the narrow concrete lip, legs dangling in empty space. Below, people were shouting, pointing up at her. SWAT officers raised their weapons, then lowered them when they realized she wasn't a threat. Above, the man in the duct appeared at the opening, pistol in hand. He looked down at Emily, then at the SWAT teams below. His weapon tracked toward her. Drop it, someone screamed from the parking lot. Drop the weapon or we fire. The man hesitated. Emily's fingers were slipping. She could feel the concrete ledge tearing the skin on her palms. Her grip wouldn't hold much longer. The man made his decision. He pulled back from the opening, disappearing into the ductwork. Emily's left hand lost its grip. She swung sideways, now holding on with just her right hand, her shoulders screaming in protest. Below her, a fire truck was moving into position, extending its ladder. Too slow. She had maybe 10 seconds before her grip failed completely. A window to her right. Second floor, patient room. If she could swing toward it, break the glass. Her right hand slipped. She fell. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the ladder rushing toward her and someone screaming her name. Emily hit the ladder at an angle that should have killed her. Instead, the impact drove the air from her lungs and sent her tumbling sideways into the arms of a firefighter who'd been climbing toward her. They both went down hard, crashing onto the extended platform in a tangle of limbs and curses. Pain exploded through Emily's ribs, her vision whiting out for a second before sound and sensation came flooding back. "Don't move!" someone shouted. "Medical? We need medical!" Hands grabbed her, checking for broken bones, for bleeding. Emily shoved them away and tried to sit up. Her head spun, nausea rolling through her stomach. She could taste blood in her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue during the fall. "I'm fine," she gasped, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Her shoulder felt like someone had driven a spike through it. Her ribs screamed with every breath. But nothing was broken, nothing critical. "Ma'am, you need to stay still until we can—" "Kane!" Emily grabbed the paramedic's arm, her grip tight enough to make him wince. "Marcus Kane. He's still inside. Third floor, surgical wing. You need to get SWAT in there now." A SWAT commander appeared beside the ladder, a hard-faced woman in full tactical gear with captain's bars on her vest. "We're already moving. Building's locked down. Nobody gets out." She studied Emily with sharp eyes. "You're Carter? The one Agent Moss called about?" Emily nodded, still trying to catch her breath. "Then you need to know. We've got your people. 3 FBI agents and a civilian extracted from the roof 6 minutes ago. They're safe." Relief hit Emily like a physical force. Holt was alive. DeMarco and his team had made it. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel it, then pushed the emotion aside. There'd be time for that later. "Kane's men are still in the building," she said. "Heavily armed, professional contractors. They cut power, jammed communications. This wasn't a random attack. We know. Agent Moss briefed us on the situation." The captain glanced toward the hospital entrance where SWAT teams were stacking up, preparing to breach. "We're going in hard. Anyone armed who doesn't drop their weapon immediately is going down. Kane himself isn't armed. He'll try to blend with hospital staff, play the victim." Emily struggled to stand, ignoring the paramedics' protests. "You need to secure him before he can establish an alibi." "We've got his photo. Every team knows to detain him on site." The captain paused. "Can you walk?" "I can run if I have to." "Good. Come with me." They moved toward the command post, a mobile unit parked at the edge of the lot, surrounded by police vehicles and federal sedans. Agent Moss was inside, coordinating with local law enforcement, her face tight with controlled tension. She looked up when Emily entered, relief flashing across her features before professional composure reasserted itself. "You're alive," Moss said. "Disappointed?" Emily leaned against the wall, her ribs protesting. "Relieved. Sit down before you fall down." Moss gestured to a chair, then turned back to the monitors showing thermal imaging feeds from the hospital. "We've got 12 confirmed hostiles still inside. 9 on the 3rd floor near the surgical wing, 3 in the basement near the electrical room. All armed. SWAT's preparing simultaneous entry." "Kane talked to me," Emily said. "Face to face. He admitted everything, the supply theft, the compound attack, all of it." Moss's eyes sharpened. "You recorded it?" "No, but he said it in front of his own men. Someone in that room might flip if they're looking at murder charges." "If we can take them alive." Moss pulled up another screen showing news footage from outside the hospital. Every major network had cameras rolling. "This is national now. Active shooter at a hospital, military casualties, FBI involvement. Kane can't make this disappear." "He's going to try." "Let him try. We've got enough to arrest him on assault charges at minimum. That buys us time to build the bigger case." Moss touched her earpiece, listening to something, then nodded. "SWAT's breaching in 30 seconds. All teams report ready." Through the command post windows, Emily could see tactical units moving into position, black-clad figures flowing toward the hospital entrances with mechanical precision. Snipers on rooftops. Perimeter secured. This was overwhelming force, the kind of response that left no room for ambiguity. The radio crackled. All units, execute, execute, execute. Flashbangs detonated inside the building, multiple floors simultaneously. Emily could see the flashes through the windows even from outside. Then came the controlled chaos of a coordinated breach. Doors smashing open, teams flooding in, voices shouting commands that overlapped into white noise. Third floor, 9 suspects in custody, no shots fired. Basement clear, 3 suspects detained. We've got wounded, need medical teams on 3 and 2. Building secure, repeat. Building secure. It was over in less than 4 minutes. The professional assault team that Kane had sent had folded immediately when faced with superior numbers and no escape route. Contractors, not fanatics. They fought for money, not ideology, and they knew when to quit. But something was wrong. Emily could see it in Moss's expression, the way her jaw tightened as she listened to reports coming through her earpiece. "What?" Emily asked. "Kane's not here," Moss said quietly. SWAT swept the entire 3rd floor. They found bodies, wounded contractors, hospital staff hiding in closets. No Kane. Emily's stomach dropped. "He was there. I saw him." "I believe you, but he's gone now." Moss pulled up building schematics on her monitor, highlighting escape routes. "There are maintenance tunnels connecting this hospital to the adjacent medical office building. If he knew about them, he knew." Emily pushed off the wall, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "He's had 3 years to prepare for this. He's not going to get caught in the building like some amateur." Then where would he go? Emily thought about it, running through Kane's psychology. He was arrogant, convinced of his own invincibility, but he was also smart enough to have contingencies. If the assault failed, if he couldn't eliminate Emily quietly, what would his next move be? "He's going to spin this," Emily said. "He's going to get in front of cameras and claim he was here trying to stop the attack. Paint himself as the hero who tried to save the day." Moss's expression darkened. "That's actually not a bad strategy. He's got the credentials, the rank, the connections. If he can control the narrative before we can arrest him, then find him first." Emily met Moss's eyes. "You said this is national news. Every network's covering it, which means Kane's going to go wherever the cameras are." Moss grabbed her phone and made a call, her voice sharp and urgent. "I need locations on all media staging areas within a mile of Silvergate Medical Center. Now." She listened, nodded. "Send units to each one. We're looking for Marcus Kane, Defense Intelligence. Detain on site." She ended the call and looked at Emily. "You're coming with me." "Why?" "Because if Kane tries to tell his version of events, I want the person he tried to kill standing right next to me when I call him a liar." They took an unmarked sedan, Moss driving with the kind of controlled aggression that came from years of high-speed pursuit training. 2 police cruisers followed as escort, lights flashing. The media staging area was 6 blocks from the hospital, a park that had been converted into an impromptu press zone, satellite trucks and camera crews packed together like sardines. And there, in the center of the chaos, standing in front of a CNN camera with a microphone clipped to his lapel, was Marcus Kane. He looked perfect. Suit slightly disheveled, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. The image of a man who'd been through hell and survived. He was talking, gesturing, his expression grave and concerned. Emily couldn't hear what he was saying from inside the car, but she could see reporters eating it up, nodding along, their faces reflecting shocked sympathy. "Son of a bitch," Moss breathed. She parked aggressively, the sedan's bumper stopping inches from a news van. Emily was out of the car before it fully stopped, her ribs screaming in protest, but her focus absolute. Moss followed, flanked by the uniformed officers from the escort vehicles. Kane saw them coming. His eyes met Emily's across the crowd, and for a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. She saw the calculation there, the cold assessment of a man deciding whether to run or fight. He chose fight. "Lieutenant Carter!" Kane's voice boomed across the park, amplified by the hot mic still clipped to his suit. Every camera swung toward Emily. "Thank heaven you're safe. I tried to reach you inside, tried to get you to evacuate, but the assault team Shut your mouth." Emily's voice was flat, cold, loud enough to carry. The crowd went silent. You sent that assault team. You ordered the attack. Kane's expression shifted to wounded confusion. I understand you've been through a trauma, Lieutenant, but you're clearly disoriented. I was here coordinating with local law enforcement when the situation developed. You were inside the building, Emily interrupted. Third floor, equipment room. You stood 6 feet from me and admitted to stealing military medical supplies, to orchestrating the attack on the field hospital in Kandahar, to trying to kill me to cover it up. The reporters surged forward, cameras zooming in, microphones thrust toward both of them. This was the money shot, the confrontation they lived for. Kane shook his head sadly. This is clearly a case of post-traumatic confusion. The woman's been under immense stress. Director Kane, Moss stepped forward, her FBI credentials held high. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and about a dozen other charges we'll add once we're done processing the contractors you hired. Kane didn't move. His eyes swept the crowd, calculating odds. Every major network was here. PBS, Fox, MSN, BC. Local affiliates. This was being broadcast live across the country. If he was arrested now, on camera, with Emily's accusations hanging in the air, the narrative would be set before he could control it. This is absurd, Kane said, his voice calm and reasonable. I'm a senior intelligence official with 40 years of service. These accusations are baseless. Your contractors are already talking, Moss said. When faced with federal murder charges, people get cooperative fast. We've got 3 of them on record saying you hired them to eliminate a witness. Want to guess who that witness was? Kane's jaw tightened. I want my attorney. You can call him from jail. Moss nodded to the uniformed officers. Cuff him. They moved forward. Kane didn't resist, but he didn't make it easy either. He kept talking, kept playing to the cameras. This is a witch hunt. A vendetta by a disgruntled former employee who faked her own death to avoid court-martial for dereliction of duty. I was never court-martialed, Emily said quietly, because I was listed as killed in action. Because you bombed the compound I was stationed at and planted false DNA evidence to make everyone believe I was dead. She took a step closer, ignoring the pain in her ribs, ignoring the cameras. You murdered 12 people to hide your crimes, but you missed one, and now everyone knows. Kane's expression finally cracked. The calm facade shattered, replaced by something uglier, raw contempt and fury barely contained. You don't know what you've done, he hissed. The operations I ran saved lives, funded missions that Congress didn't have the stomach to approve. I made hard choices that people like you could never understand. You stole from dying soldiers, Emily said. You're not a patriot, you're a thief and a murderer. And you're done. The officers cuffed him. Kane was still talking as they led him away, still trying to spin the story, but his voice was drowned out by the barrage of shouted questions from reporters. Moss stayed behind, fielding inquiries with practiced deflection, promising a formal statement once the investigation progressed. Emily turned away from the chaos and walked back toward the sedan. Her legs felt like rubber. Adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it was hard to keep standing. She leaned against the car, breathing carefully, each inhale a controlled negotiation with her damaged ribs. A reporter broke through the police line and shoved a microphone toward her. Miss Carter, can you comment on your relationship with Director Kane? Were you romantically involved? Get that out of my face, Emily said tiredly. Moss appeared and steered the reporter away with a firm hand. That's enough. Give her space. They got back in the car and drove in silence. Not back to the hospital. That was still an active crime scene. Instead, Moss took them to the FBI field office downtown, a blocky concrete building that looked like it had been designed to withstand a siege. Inside, it was all harsh lighting and industrial carpet, the functional aesthetic of an organization that valued results over comfort. Moss led Emily to a conference room and closed the door, shutting out the noise and chaos. You need medical attention. I need about 15 things before medical attention, Emily said, slumping into a chair. Starting with sleep and ending with a new identity. That's not happening. You're the star witness in what's going to be the biggest military corruption trial in 2 decades. Moss sat across from her, pulling out a tablet. We need to get your statement on record while it's fresh. Everything Kane said to you in that equipment room, everything you saw, I know the drill. Emily closed her eyes. Can I get coffee first? I'll get you a whole pot. The debrief took 3 hours. Emily walked Moss through every detail. The initial discovery of the supply theft, her attempts to report it through proper channels, the attack on the compound, her survival and subsequent 3 years in hiding. Then the recent events, Langford's appearance, the assault on the hospital, Kane's confession. Moss recorded everything, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions or to have Emily repeat specific statements. It was exhausting, dredging up memories Emily had tried to bury, but it was also necessary. This was the foundation of the case against Kane. When they finally finished, Moss set down the tablet and rubbed her eyes. Okay, that's enough for now. We'll need more later, but you've given us plenty to work with. What happens to Kane? Emily asked. He's in federal custody. Arraignment will be tomorrow morning. His attorney's already making noise about bail, but with the severity of the charges and his access to resources, I doubt any judge will grant it. Moss paused. This is going to be a long process, Carter. Months, maybe years. You're going to be under a microscope the entire time. Defense attorneys will dig into every aspect of your life, trying to discredit you. I know. Can you handle that? Emily thought about it. 3 years ago, the answer would have been no. She'd been broken, traumatized, convinced that the system was rigged against her. But 3 years of surviving, of rebuilding herself piece by piece, had changed something fundamental. Yeah, she said finally, I can handle it. Moss nodded, something like respect in her eyes. Good, because we're going to need you. She stood. Come on. I'll get you to a hotel, somewhere safe, where you can rest. We've got protection details set up, rotating shifts. You won't be alone. What about the soldiers? Emily asked. The ones from Fort Carson who were at the hospital, are they okay? Most of them, yes. The critical cases were transferred to other facilities once the building was secured. No deaths. Moss opened the door. You saved a lot of lives today, Carter. Don't forget that. Emily didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd stumbled through chaos and barely survived. But she didn't argue. The hotel was a mid-range chain near the airport, the kind of anonymous space designed for business travelers and people passing through. Moss walked Emily to her room personally, checking the locks and windows before nodding to the plainclothes agent stationed in the hallway. Get some sleep, Moss said. I'll call you tomorrow with an update. Emily locked the door behind her and stood in the center of the room, suddenly unsure what to do with herself. The silence was overwhelming after the noise and chaos of the past 48 hours. She could hear traffic outside, the muffled sound of a TV from the adjacent room, but inside her space it was still. She showered, letting hot water wash away blood and dirt and the chemical smell of tear gas that had soaked into her skin. Her ribs were purple with bruising, her shoulder swollen. She'd need x-rays eventually, but not tonight. Tonight she just needed to stop moving. She collapsed onto the bed without bothering to dry her hair, intending to rest for just a moment. Instead, she fell into sleep so deep it was like falling into a black hole. She woke to pounding on the door. Emily jackknifed upright, heart racing, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Disorientation crashed over her. She didn't recognize the room, didn't know what time it was, couldn't remember. Carter! Open up! Langford's voice. Emily stumbled to the door and checked the peephole. Langford stood in the hallway, still in uniform, his face drawn with exhaustion. The plainclothes agent was behind him, looking alert but not alarmed. She opened the door. What's wrong? Kane made bail. The words hit her like a fist to the stomach. What? Federal judge granted bail 2 hours ago. $10 million, surrendered passport, GPS monitoring. His attorney argued that he's not a flight risk given his service record and that the charges are circumstantial. Langford's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. He walked out of custody 90 minutes ago. Emily's mind raced. Kane was out. Free. With resources and connections and a powerful motivation to eliminate the primary witness against him. Where is he now? She asked. Unknown. The GPS monitor went offline 40 minutes ago. Marshals are searching, but Langford didn't need to finish the sentence. Kane had vanished. Emily stepped back into the room, her exhaustion evaporating, replaced by cold clarity. He's coming for me. We don't know that. Yes, we do. It's what I'd do. Emily grabbed her jacket, checking the pockets. Her phone was dead. He can't beat the charges if I'm alive to testify. His only play is to eliminate me before trial. Which is why you're under protection, Langford said. We've got agents outside, backup units on standby. He'd have to be insane to try anything now. Emily met his eyes. He bombed a military compound and faked my death. Insane is kind of his specialty. Langford pulled out his phone. I'm calling Moss. We need to move you to a secure facility, somewhere Kane can't... The lights went out. Not just in the room. The entire hotel. Emily could see through the window that the whole block had gone dark, streetlights dying in sequence like dominoes falling. Down! Emily shouted, tackling Langford to the floor as the window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the room. Something metallic clattered on the carpet. Not a bullet. A canister. Smoke erupted, thick and choking. Emily grabbed Langford and dragged him toward the bathroom, the only interior room with a door. They made it inside just as automatic weapons fire ripped through the hotel room, rounds punching through walls and furniture with devastating efficiency. How many? Langford gasped. Too many. Emily slammed the bathroom door and locked it. A joke of a barrier, but better than nothing. She could hear boots in the hallway outside, coordinated movement. This wasn't a hasty assassination attempt. This was a full tactical operation. Kane had planned this, maybe as a contingency, maybe as a primary strategy all along. Either way, he wasn't sending contractors this time. He was throwing everything at her. Langford was on his phone, voice clipped and urgent. Shots fired at the Skyline Hotel, room 412. Multiple hostiles, officer under fire, need immediate backup. The bathroom wall exploded, not from gunfire, from a breaching charge. The explosion blew a hole the size of a basketball through the drywall, connecting Emily's bathroom to the adjacent room. Smoke poured through. Figures moved in the haze. Emily and Langford scrambled backward, pressed against the bathtub. No weapons. No cover. No way out. A man stepped through the hole in the wall. Tactical gear, night vision goggles, rifle raised. He swept the room, weapon tracking, finger on the trigger. Then he lowered the rifle and pulled off his goggles. It was Kane. He'd come himself. Not sending proxies this time. Doing it personally. Hello, Lieutenant, Kane said calmly, like they were meeting for coffee. I told you this would end badly. He raised the rifle, centered it on Emily's chest, and began to squeeze the trigger. The red dot from Kane's laser sight centered on Emily's sternum, steady and precise. His finger began the slow squeeze that would end everything. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of survival, all of it collapsing into this single moment in a hotel bathroom filled with smoke and the smell of explosives. Emily's hand shot out and grabbed the shower curtain rod above her head. She yanked it down with all her strength just as the rifle fired. The metal rod caught the barrel mid-shot, deflecting it upward. The round punched through the ceiling instead of Emily's chest, raining down plaster and insulation. She didn't wait. She swung the rod like a bat, connecting with Kane's rifle. The weapon clattered from his hands. Langford lunged from his position by the tub, driving his shoulder into Kane's midsection. The older man grunted but didn't go down. He was heavier than he looked, solid muscle beneath the expensive suit. Kane's elbow came around in a vicious arc, catching Langford across the temple. The admiral stumbled backward, dazed. Kane turned back to Emily, his hand already reaching for the sidearm holstered at his hip. Emily threw the curtain rod. It wasn't meant to hit him. It was meant to buy a second. While Kane ducked, Emily dove through the hole in the bathroom wall into the adjacent room. She hit the carpet hard, rolled, came up running. Behind her, Kane was shouting orders to whoever else was in the building. The adjacent hotel room was empty, but the door to the hallway stood open. Emily could see shadows moving, tactical lights cutting through the darkness. At least 3 more men, maybe 4. All armed, all professional. She couldn't fight her way through that. The window. It was her only option. Emily grabbed a desk chair and hurled it at the glass. The window shattered outward in a spray of fragments. Cold night air rushed in. She was 4 stories up. Below, the hotel pool glowed an eerie blue-green in the darkness, lit by underwater lights that ran on a separate power system. It was a stupid plan, the kind of plan that got people killed. Emily jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Wind tore at her clothes. Her stomach lurched into her throat. Then she hit the water, the impact like slamming into concrete. The pool was only 8 feet deep. She hit the bottom hard, her already damaged ribs screaming in protest. Water filled her nose and mouth. She kicked toward the surface, lungs burning. She broke through gasping, coughing up chlorinated water. Around the pool deck, hotel guests were screaming and running. The power outage had sent everyone into panic mode, and now a woman had just crashed through a fourth-floor window into the pool. Chaos was complete. Emily hauled herself out of the water and ran, soaking wet, barefoot, moving on pure survival instinct. She could hear shouting from above. Kane's men had reached the broken window, were tracking her movement. She zigzagged through the parking lot, using cars for cover, making herself a harder target. A sedan screeched to a halt beside her. Emily's fist was already cocked back to fight when the passenger window rolled down and Moss's face appeared. "Get in!" Emily dove into the back seat. Moss accelerated before the door even closed, tires smoking as they fishtailed out of the parking lot. In the driver's seat was Agent DeMarco, his face grim and focused. "Langford?" Emily gasped. "Extracted 2 minutes ago," Moss said. "Took a hit to the head, but he's conscious. Kane?" "In the hotel, with at least 5 men." Emily shook water from her eyes. "How did you find me?" "We didn't lose you. When the GPS on Kane went dark, I put surveillance on every approach to your location. We saw the power grid get hit and mobilized immediately." Moss twisted in her seat to look at Emily. "But we were almost too late. Kane's not playing games anymore." "He never was." Emily leaned back, breathing hard, her body a symphony of pain. "He's desperate. The bail was a mistake. His attorney probably told him to run, disappear into some country without extradition. But Kane can't let it go. He has to eliminate me first." "That's not going to happen," DeMarco said flatly. "We're taking you to a federal safe house. Secure location, armed guards, the whole package. Kane won't get within a mile of you." "He already did. Twice." Emily closed her eyes. "He's got resources we don't even know about. Contractors, inside information, enough money to make problems disappear. Hiding me just delays the inevitable." Moss was quiet for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop running and start hunting." They drove to the FBI field office instead of a safe house. Inside, the place had transformed into a war room. Agents hunched over computers, phones ringing constantly, wall-mounted screens showing news coverage of the hotel attack. The story was everywhere now, impossible to contain. Military corruption, attempted murder, a fugitive intelligence official. This was the kind of scandal that brought down careers and administrations. Moss led Emily to a conference room and shut the door, muting the chaos. "Talk to me. What's your plan?" Emily sat down, wincing as her ribs protested. "Kane's advantage is that he operates in the shadows. He's spent 40 years building networks, cultivating relationships, creating leverage. But now he's exposed. Every move he makes is going to be scrutinized. Every contact he reaches out to is a potential witness against him." "Agreed. But that doesn't help us find him before he finds you." "He's not going to find me. He's going to think he found me." Emily leaned forward. "We set a trap. Leak my location through a channel we know he's monitoring. Make it look like an accidental security breach, something he'd believe. When he comes for me, we'll be ready." Moss shook her head. "You're talking about using yourself as bait again. That nearly got you killed an hour ago. And hiding nearly got me killed 3 years ago. Kane doesn't quit. The only way this ends is if we put him down hard enough that he can't get back up." Emily met Moss's eyes. "I'm tired of running. Let's finish this." The plan came together over the next 6 hours. They identified a contact in Kane's network, a former defense intelligence analyst who'd been flagged in earlier corruption investigations but never charged. The analyst, a man named Gerald Pritchard, still had access to certain federal databases through contractor loopholes. Moss had been monitoring his activity for months. They fed Pritchard false information through a deliberately insecure channel, a report claiming Emily was being held at a bureau safe house in Boulder, 30 miles north of Denver. The location was real, a facility the FBI actually used for witness protection. But Emily wouldn't be there. Instead, they'd have a full tactical team waiting, along with enough surveillance equipment to document everything Kane did. "He'll see through this," DeMarco warned. "Kane's not stupid. A leak this convenient will smell like a trap." "Maybe," Emily said, "but he's also desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and Kane's ego won't let him believe we're smart enough to outmaneuver him. The bait was set. Now they had to wait. It took less than 3 hours. Pritchard accessed the fake report at 11 p.m. By midnight, there was suspicious activity near the Boulder safe house. Vehicles circling the block, drones doing aerial reconnaissance. Kane was probing, testing defenses, looking for weaknesses. Emily watched it all unfold from the FBI command center, surrounded by screens showing live feeds from a dozen different cameras. Moss stood beside her, coordinating with tactical teams on the ground. "He's not committing yet," Moss observed. "Just reconnaissance. He's careful. He'll wait until he's sure." Emily studied the drone footage. "How long can we maintain the illusion?" "As long as we need to. We've got agents inside posing as you. From a distance, thermal imaging will show a body in the right location." On screen, one of the surveillance vehicles, a black SUV with tinted windows, pulled away from the safe house perimeter and headed back toward Denver. Running the footage back, Emily caught a glimpse of the driver through a brief window reflection. Kane. He'd come to see for himself. "He's confirmed the location," Emily said. "Now he's going to plan the assault, probably tomorrow night when he's had time to position resources." But Kane surprised them. At 3 a.m., every alarm in the command center went off simultaneously. The Boulder safe house was under attack, not by a small team, but by overwhelming force. Vehicles blocking the streets, armed men in tactical gear breaching from multiple entry points, flashbangs and smoke grenades. This wasn't a surgical strike, this was scorched earth. "All units respond," Moss shouted into her radio. "Weapons free. Engage all hostiles." The firefight lasted 8 minutes. FBI tactical teams inside the safe house returned fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Outside, local police and bureau reinforcements were rushing to the scene, but traffic and distance slowed their response. Emily watched in horror as the battle unfolded on screen. This was her fault. She'd underestimated Kane's resources, his willingness to commit everything to this final play. Then the shooting stopped. Kane's voice came over a radio frequency, broadcast in the clear so everyone could hear. "I know she's not here. I know this is a trap. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk away from this building, and you're not going to stop me. Because if you do, I'll release documentation of every black operation I've run for the past 20 years. Operations your government doesn't want the public to know about. Targeted killings, coups, weapons deals with terrorists. All of it." Moss's face went pale. "He's bluffing." "Maybe," Emily said. "Or maybe he's telling the truth. Either way, you can't let him walk. If he releases that information, it'll be an international catastrophe. And if he walks, he'll kill me eventually. Then he'll kill everyone else who knows about his crimes. How many more people have to die for this to stay secret?" Moss stood frozen, the radio in her hand, the weight of an impossible decision crushing down on her shoulders. Emily took the radio. "Kane? This is Carter." Static, then Kane's voice, cold and composed. "Lieutenant, I wondered when you'd speak up. You want me? I'll trade. Me for everyone in that building. You let them walk, you get what you came for." "Emily, don't," Moss started, but Emily waved her off. Kane laughed, a sound without humor. "You think I trust you to honor that deal? You think I'm going to walk into another trap? I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to finish what you started 3 years ago." Emily's voice was steady, calm. "You want me dead. I'm giving you the chance, but you do it face to face, no proxies, no contractors, just you and me. Because you're right about one thing, this has to end, tonight." The silence stretched for 15 seconds, 20. "Where?" Kane said finally. "Silvergate Medical Center, main lobby, 1 hour, no weapons, no backup, just us." Emily paused. "Unless you're afraid to face someone you can't hide behind a desk or an airstrike." She could hear Kane's breathing over the radio, fast and angry. She'd hit a nerve, his ego, his pride, the thing that had driven him to build an empire, and the thing that would ultimately destroy him. 1 hour, Kane said. "If I see FBI, if I see police, I release everything. And then I disappear, and you spend the rest of your short life looking over your shoulder." The transmission cut off. Moss grabbed Emily's shoulder. "This is insane. You're giving him exactly what he wants." "No, I'm giving him what he thinks he wants. There's a difference." They had 1 hour. Emily used it to prepare. She changed into clean clothes, jeans, a dark shirt, boots that wouldn't slip on tile floors. Nothing restrictive. Nothing that would slow her down. Her ribs were taped, her shoulders supported by a brace. The pain was still there, sharp and persistent, but manageable. Pain was just information. It told you where you were damaged. It didn't control what you could do. Moss tried one more time to talk her out of it. We can have snipers positioned, undercover agents inside the building. You don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do. Because if Kane sees any of that, he'll run, and people will die. Emily checked her watch. But I'm not going in defenseless. She held out her hand. Moss stared at her for a long moment, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small revolver, a Smith & Wesson 6.42 5-shots, compact enough to conceal. She handed it to Emily along with the ankle holster. If this goes wrong, Moss started. It won't, Emily said. But they both knew it might. Silvergate Medical Center looked different at 4 in the morning. The ER was still operational, ambulances coming and going, but the main building was dark and quiet. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red. The front lobby was empty, the information desk unmanned, chairs arranged in neat rows that no one sat in. Emily stood in the center of the lobby, hands visible, waiting. Kane arrived exactly on time. He came through the main entrance alone, just as promised. No tactical gear this time, just a dark suit and the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting away with crimes. He stopped 20 feet from Emily, studying her. You look like hell, he observed. You should see the other guys. Kane smiled thinly. I did. Several of them won't be going home. He took a step closer. I respect what you've done, you know. Most people would have stayed hidden, stayed safe. But you came back. You fought. That takes courage. Don't try to connect with me. You're not a soldier. You're a thief and a murderer. I'm a realist. I saw opportunities and I took them. That's how the world works, Lieutenant. The strong take what they need. The weak make excuses. Kane's hand moved to his jacket pocket. Emily's hand dropped to her ankle, fingers closing on the revolver's grip. Relax, Kane said, pulling out a phone. Just showing you something. He held up the screen. On it, a file directory, thousands of documents. Everything I told you about. Operations that never existed. People who were disappeared. Money that was moved. All of it backed up to a dozen different servers around the world. If my heart stops, if I don't check in every 12 hours, it all goes public automatically. You're bluffing. Am I? You willing to bet your government's reputation on that? Kane pocketed the phone. Here's the deal. You disappear. Permanently this time. I'll testify that you were mentally unstable, that you fabricated the accusations against me out of revenge for a training incident. With you gone, there's no case. I walk. You vanish. Everyone wins. Except the 12 people you murdered, and every soldier who died because you stole their medical supplies. They don't win. Kane's expression hardened. They were acceptable losses in service of a greater mission. You're too small-minded to understand that. No, I understand perfectly. You valued money over lives. You're not serving anything but yourself. Emily took a step forward. And your dead man's switch? It's a bluff. Because if you really had that insurance, you wouldn't be here. You'd be on a plane to somewhere without extradition. You came because you need to tie up loose ends because you're afraid. Something flickered in Kane's eyes. Uncertainty. Doubt. Emily pressed harder. You didn't build a failsafe because you never thought you'd need one. You spent 40 years being untouchable. You got arrogant, and now you're standing in the middle of a hospital lobby with FBI surveillance recording every word you say. Kane's face went white. You said no backup. I lied, Emily smiled. Just like you lied about the compound in Kandahar. Just like you lied about the DNA evidence. Just like you've lied about everything for 40 years. Kane's hand went to his jacket, not for a phone this time, for a gun. Emily was faster. She drew the revolver and fired once. The round hit Kane in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His pistol clattered to the floor. He stumbled, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. His face twisted with rage and pain. You shot me, he gasped, as if he couldn't believe it. Yeah. Emily kept the revolver trained on him. Hurts, doesn't it? Getting hit when you're not expecting it, when you think you're safe. The lobby doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands. Kane went down to his knees, his good hand raised in surrender. The fight had gone out of him. He looked smaller now, diminished, just an old man bleeding on hospital tile. Moss appeared at Emily's side, taking the revolver gently from her hand. "We got everything. Audio, video, his confession on tape. He's done." Emily watched as agents cuffed Kane and read him his rights. She felt hollow, not triumphant, not relieved, just tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Moss said. "It's over." The trial took 11 months to prepare. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from contractors who'd flipped, financial records showing millions diverted from military accounts, communications between Kane and the analysts he'd corrupted. Emily spent hours being deposed, her story picked apart and verified from every angle. Kane's defense fell apart in the first week. His attorney tried to paint him as a patriot making hard choices, but the jury wasn't buying it. Not when they saw the photos of the destroyed compound. Not when they heard testimony from the families of the soldiers who'd died. The verdict came back unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Emily attended, sitting in the gallery with Langford beside her. Kane was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hair gone completely gray, his face gaunt. He looked at Emily once, briefly, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. He'd die behind bars. As they led Kane away, he tried to speak, tried to shout something about appeals and injustice, but the guards silenced him and he disappeared through a side door. Emily would never see him again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emily gave a brief statement, thanking the FBI, thanking the jury, expressing hope that this would bring closure to the families of the victims. Then she walked away, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions, leaving the circus behind. Langford caught up with her at the parking garage. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know yet," Emily admitted. "Ask me in a month." "Fair enough." Langford paused. "I wanted you to know the Secretary of Defense is reviewing your case. The false death certificate, the manufactured evidence. They're going to clear your record, restore your rank, give you the honorable discharge you should have gotten." Emily leaned against her car. "I'm not sure I want it." "I understand, but you earned it. 12 people died because Kane valued money over lives. You made sure he answered for that. That matters." "Does it?" Emily looked up at the sky, clear blue, not a cloud in sight. "They're still dead. Justice doesn't bring them back." "No, but it means they weren't forgotten. It means their deaths weren't meaningless." Langford's voice was gentle. "And it means the next person who thinks about doing what Kane did will remember what happened to him." Emily nodded slowly. Maybe he was right. Maybe that was enough. She went back to Silvergate Medical Center 6 weeks after the trial ended. Not as a patient, as a visitor. Dr. Ryan Holt met her at the ER entrance. He looked different, older somehow, the arrogance gone from his face, replaced by something more thoughtful. "Carter, I wasn't sure you'd come." "You asked," Emily said simply. He led her through the ER, past the trauma bays where she'd worked, past the nurses' station where Maria Gonzalez waved a greeting. They ended up in his office, the same cramped space where they'd been when the lights went out and Kane's assault began. Holt gestured to a chair. Emily sat. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I've said that before, but I don't think I really understood what I was apologizing for. I treated you like you were incompetent because you were quiet, because you didn't push back. I made assumptions based on nothing except my own ego." "Yeah," Emily said, "you did." Holt winced but didn't look away. "I've been thinking about why. And I realized, I saw your hesitation, your shaking hands, and I interpreted it as weakness. But it wasn't weakness. It was trauma. You were carrying something heavy, and instead of recognizing that, I mocked you for it." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid. Every day. Afraid someone would recognize me. Afraid Kane would find me. Afraid I'd mess up and people would die because I wasn't good enough anymore." She met his eyes. "So yeah, my hands shook, and I kept my head down, because the alternative was falling apart completely. But you didn't fall apart. When it mattered, When soldiers were dying and buildings were under attack, you stepped up. You saved lives. Holt paused. I watched the security footage, all of it. The way you handled those trauma cases, the way you fought off armed men. You're better than half the surgeons I know. I'm a medic, not a surgeon. You're whatever you decide to be. Holt pulled out a folder from his desk. Which is why I wanted to talk to you. We have an opening for a trauma coordinator position. It's part administration, part clinical work. You'd be training new staff, developing protocols, working with both civilian and military cases when they come in. And you'd be doing it here, at Silvergate, if you want. Emily stared at the folder. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to do what you're clearly meant to do. Help people, save lives. Just this time you wouldn't have to hide while doing it. She thought about it. 3 years she'd spent invisible, hiding her skills, pretending to be less than she was. And before that, years in combat zones where every day was survival and every patient was a battle against time and inadequate resources. Maybe it was time for something different, something stable, something where she could use everything she'd learned without constantly looking over her shoulder. I'll think about it, Emily said. Marcus Reed found her in the hospital cafeteria an hour later. He slid into the seat across from her, setting down 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee this time, not the break room sludge. Heard you're back, he said. Visiting. Holt offered you the coordinator position. News travels fast. Small hospital, smaller staff. Marcus smiled. For what it's worth, I hope you take it. We could use someone with your experience. Emily wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. I don't know if I can do this. Working here, being visible. Everyone knows my story now. The trial was all over the news. I can't just blend in anymore. No, Marcus agreed. You can't. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe being visible means you can actually help people instead of just surviving. I helped people before. And you can help more people now, without hiding, without fear. Marcus leaned back. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand what you went through, but I know what I saw, someone who refused to break even when everything was falling apart. That's not common. That's special. And it'd be a waste to let that disappear. Emily looked around the cafeteria. Hospital staff eating lunch, talking quietly, going about their routines. Normal people living normal lives. For 3 years, she'd watched from the outside, never quite part of it. Too afraid to connect. Too broken to rebuild. But Kane was in prison. The truth was public. And Emily Carter, Lieutenant Emily Carter, was officially alive again. Maybe it was time to start acting like it. She took the job. 3 months later, Emily stood in the ER during a quiet night shift, reviewing trauma protocols with a new hire. A young nurse fresh out of school who looked terrified and eager in equal measure. The kind of person Emily had been once, before war and betrayal had reshaped her. The key is staying calm, Emily explained. When everything's chaos, when patients are screaming and blood is everywhere, you have to find that quiet space in your head. That's where decisions come from. Not panic, not fear, just clear thinking. How do you find that space? The nurse asked. Emily thought about it. Practice, experience, and understanding that fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The trick is not letting it control you. An ambulance pulled up outside, lights flashing. The radio crackled with an incoming trauma alert. Multiple vehicle collision, 3 critical patients. Emily felt the familiar spike of adrenaline, the old patterns clicking into place. But this time, her hands didn't shake. She moved toward the ambulance bay doors, the new nurse following. Maria Gonzalez was already there, prepping a gurney. Dr. Holt appeared from the doctor's lounge, pulling on gloves. The doors opened. EMTs wheeled in this first patient, young male, unconscious, severe head trauma. Emily's mind cataloged injuries and priorities automatically. Intubate, secure the airway, CT scan, neurosurgery consult. Trauma Bay 2, she called out. Let's move. They worked through the night. 3 patients, all critical, all surviving because the team moved fast and didn't hesitate. When it was over, when the last patient was stable and heading to the ICU, Emily stood at the scrub sink washing blood from her hands. Marcus appeared beside her. Good work tonight. Team effort. Still, you held it together, kept everyone focused. He dried his hands. You ever think about going back? To the military, I mean. With your record cleared, you could— No, Emily said firmly. That part of my life is over. Fair enough. Marcus paused. What's next then? Just this? Emily looked through the window into the ER. The organized chaos. The constant flow of people who needed help. The endless opportunity to make a difference, one patient at a time. Just this, she agreed, and that's enough. 2 years after Kane's conviction, Emily received a letter. It came through official military channels, forwarded from Fort Bragg. Inside was an invitation to a memorial dedication ceremony. The families of the 12 people who died in the Kandahar compound attack had fundraised for a monument, a simple stone marker listing their names and the date they died. Emily almost didn't go. The memories were still too sharp, the guilt too heavy. But Langford called personally and asked her to attend. Said it would mean something to the families. Said they deserved to see the person who'd made sure their loved ones weren't forgotten. So she went. The ceremony was small and private. Family members, a few surviving soldiers from the unit, Langford in his dress blues looking every bit the decorated officer he was, and Emily, wearing civilian clothes, standing at the back of the gathering. One by one, family members spoke. They talked about sons and daughters, husbands and wives, people who'd served with honor and died too young. They thanked Emily, some of them in person, shaking her hand, their eyes wet with tears. They told her she'd given them closure, given them justice. Emily didn't know what to say to that. Justice felt like an inadequate word for what had happened. Kane was in prison, yes. The truth was public. But 12 people were still dead, and no amount of courtroom victories would change that. After the ceremony, an older woman approached Emily. She was small and gray-haired, wearing a black dress and carrying herself with quiet dignity. Emily recognized her from the trial. Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, mother of Specialist Daniel Hoffman, who'd been 23 when he died in the compound. Miss Carter, Mrs. Hoffman said softly, may I speak with you? Of course. They walked to a bench under a tree, away from the crowd. Mrs. Hoffman sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. I wanted to thank you for what you did, for not giving up. I wish I could have done more, Emily said. I wish I could have saved them. You were trying to. That's what Daniel's letters said, that you were fighting to get them the supplies they needed, that you cared. Mrs. Hoffman's voice cracked slightly. The official report said it was enemy action, a rocket attack, random and unavoidable. For 3 years, I believed that. I thought my son just had terrible luck. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth. Don't be. The truth is better than a lie, even when it hurts. Mrs. Hoffman looked at Emily with clear, steady eyes. You know what the worst part was? Thinking he died for nothing. Just random violence in a war that didn't make sense. But now I know. He died because someone chose money over his life. And that person is facing consequences because of you. That matters. Emily felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying for 5 years starting to unwind. I hope it brings you peace. It brings me closure. Peace takes longer. Mrs. Hoffman stood, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. But you gave my son's death meaning. You made sure it wasn't forgotten. That's more than most people get. Thank you. She walked away, rejoining the other families. Emily sat on the bench for a long time, watching the memorial stone in the distance, reading the names carved into granite. She'd carried their weight for so long, the guilt, the responsibility, the feeling that she should have done more, should have been smarter, should have saved them. But she'd done what she could. She'd fought when fighting seemed impossible. She'd survived when survival was the hardest thing. And she'd made sure the person responsible answered for his crimes. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. Emily stood and walked to the memorial. She traced one name with her finger, Specialist Daniel Hoffman. Then the others, each one a life cut short, each one a person who deserved better. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, she whispered, but I made sure you mattered. I made sure people knew what happened, and I made sure he paid for it. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a flag snapped against its pole. The ceremony was ending, people drifting away toward cars, toward the rest of their lives. Emily turned and walked back toward Langford, who was waiting by the parking lot. He looked at her with concern. "You okay?" "Yeah," Emily said. And for the first time in 5 years, she meant it. 5 years after Kane's conviction, Emily sat in her office at Silvergate Medical Center, reviewing a proposal for a new trauma training program. The hospital had grown, expanded, added a new wing specifically for emergency services. And Emily had grown with it, from coordinator to assistant director, building programs that bridged military and civilian medicine, creating systems that saved lives. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Turn on the news." Channel 9. Emily grabbed the remote and switched on the small TV in her office. The screen showed a reporter standing outside a federal prison, microphone in hand, speaking urgently. "Confirmed this morning that Marcus Kane, the former Defense Intelligence Director convicted of corruption and murder, has died in prison. Sources say Kane suffered a heart attack during routine exercise and was pronounced dead at the prison medical facility. He was 69 years old." Emily turned off the TV. She sat in silence for a long moment, waiting to feel something. Relief. Satisfaction. Closure. Instead, she felt nothing. Kane's death didn't change anything. The people he'd killed were still dead. The systems he'd corrupted still needed fixing. His absence from the world didn't make it significantly better or worse. He was just gone, and the world would keep turning. Emily's phone rang. It was Moss. "You heard?" "I heard. How are you doing?" "I'm fine." Emily looked out her window at the ER entrance below. Ambulances coming and going, the endless cycle of crisis and care. "He doesn't matter anymore. He stopped mattering a long time ago." "Good." Moss paused. "There's something else. Kane's assets are being liquidated. His attorney contacted me. Apparently Kane left instructions that if anything happened to him, a portion of his estate should be donated to veterans' medical causes. It's probably an attempt to rehabilitate his reputation posthumously, but how much?" Emily asked. $4 million. Emily laughed, sharp and bitter. "Blood money. Maybe, but it could fund a lot of good work. Scholarships for combat medics, equipment for field hospitals, research into trauma care." Moss's voice was careful. "I was thinking, maybe you'd be the right person to oversee how that money gets used. Make sure it actually helps people instead of just being a PR stunt for a dead man." Emily thought about it. Kane had spent his life taking from soldiers, stealing supplies, prioritizing profit over lives. Using his money to actually help veterans would be a kind of poetic justice, making something good from something terrible. "Send me the paperwork," Emily said. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." She hung up and turned back to her computer, back to the proposal for the new training program. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But that was okay, because work meant purpose. Work meant helping people. Work meant the difference between Emily Carter, who'd spent 3 years hiding in fear, and Emily Carter, who'd stood up and fought back and won. The person she'd become was stronger than the person she'd been. Not because she'd stopped being afraid. Fear was still there, always would be. But because she'd learned to act despite the fear, to fight despite the odds. To keep going when giving up would have been easier. That was the real victory. Not Kane's conviction or his death. Not the vindication or the recognition. It was the simple fact that Emily had survived and rebuilt and found a way to make her life matter. 7 years after the trial, Emily stood in front of a room full of medical students at the University of Colorado, giving a guest lecture on trauma care in austere environments. It was something she did twice a semester now, sharing the lessons she'd learned in combat zones and emergency rooms, preparing the next generation of medics and doctors. "The most important thing to understand," she told the students, "is that perfect conditions don't exist. You'll never have enough supplies. You'll never have enough time. The equipment will malfunction. The power will go out. Things will go wrong. And you have to be okay with that." A student raised her hand. "How do you stay calm when everything's falling apart?" Emily smiled. "You remember why you're there, not for recognition or praise or to prove how good you are. You're there because someone's life depends on you. And that's bigger than your fear, bigger than your doubt, bigger than whatever chaos is happening around you." She clicked to the next slide. a photo of a field hospital, soldiers working under canvas in the middle of nowhere. This was taken in Afghanistan. We had minimal equipment, constant threat of attack, and more casualties than we could handle. It should have been impossible, but we did it anyway, because that's the job. Another hand went up. How did you deal with the trauma? After everything you went through? Emily paused. It was a question she got asked a lot, and she never had a perfect answer. Honestly, I didn't deal with it for a long time. I buried it, hid from it, pretended I was fine when I wasn't, and that almost destroyed me. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students who still believed medicine was about saving everyone, who hadn't yet learned that sometimes you lost patience despite doing everything right. What saved me, Emily continued, was accepting that trauma doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The shaking hands, the hypervigilance, the nightmares. Those aren't character flaws. They're normal responses to abnormal situations. And the way you heal isn't by pretending they don't exist. It's by acknowledging them and moving forward anyway. The lecture ended with applause. Students approached afterward with questions, with thanks, with stories about why they'd chosen medicine. Emily listened to all of them, answered every question, because she remembered being in their position once, young and hopeful and terrified of failing. As the last student left, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He'd left Silvergate 2 years ago to take a position at the university hospital, but they still stayed in touch, still grabbed coffee occasionally. Good lecture, he said. Thanks. You ever think about teaching full-time? You're good at it. Emily shook her head. I like the ER too much. The immediacy, the knowing you made a direct difference in someone's life. Fair enough? Marcus handed her a coffee. Speaking of which, I heard through the grapevine that the VA is looking for a regional director of emergency services. Someone to oversee trauma programs across 6 states. Basically what you're doing now, but bigger scale. Not interested. Why not? Emily thought about it. Because administration takes me further from patients, and patients are why I do this. The moment I'm sitting in meetings all day instead of actually helping people is the moment I've lost the plot. Marcus nodded understanding. Can't argue with that. They walked out of the lecture hall together, into the Colorado sunshine. The campus was beautiful in spring, trees in bloom, students on the quad, the mountains visible in the distance. You seem good, Marcus observed. Happy, even. I am, Emily said. And it was true. She'd built a life that mattered. She had work she believed in. She had people who respected her not because of her past, but because of what she did every day. The weight of what had happened would always be there. The compound, the deaths, the years in hiding. But it didn't define her anymore. She'd survived. She'd fought back. She'd won. And now she was helping other people survive too. That was enough. That was everything. 10 years after Kane's conviction, Emily Carter walked into Silvergate Medical Center for a night shift, her badge swinging from a lanyard, her scrubs comfortable and worn. The ER was busy. Friday nights always were, but it was controlled chaos, the kind she'd learned to thrive in. Maria Gonzalez waved from the nurses' station. We've got a bad MVA coming in. 3 patients, all critical, ETA, 2 minutes. Copy that. Emily moved to Trauma Bay 1, running through mental checklists, equipment, protocols, team assignments, the machinery of emergency medicine that had become second nature. The ambulance arrived. EMTs rushed in with the first patient, a woman in her 40s, unconscious, multiple injuries. Emily's hands moved automatically, assessing, prioritizing, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Around her, the team worked in perfect synchronization. No hesitation, no panic, just skill and focus, and the shared understanding that this was what they'd trained for. They saved all 3 patients that night. Afterward, Emily stood at the scrub sink, washing blood from her hands for what felt like the millionth time in her career. She was tired. Her ribs, the ones that had been broken so many times, ached with the promise of rain. She had paperwork waiting, meetings tomorrow, 100 administrative tasks that never ended. But someone had called her name earlier. A patient she'd treated months ago, now recovered, who'd stopped by to say thank you, who'd told Emily that she'd saved his life and he'd never forget it. That was why she did this, not for recognition or awards or to prove anything to anyone, but because when you stood between someone and death and you won, it mattered. It always mattered. Emily dried her hands and looked at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. She was older now, lines around her eyes, silver starting to thread through her dark hair. The tremor in her hands was gone, replaced by steady confidence. She'd been a scared girl once, playing soldier in places that chewed people up and spit them out. Then she'd been a broken woman, hiding in shadows, convinced she was too damaged to matter. Now she was neither of those things. She was Emily Carter, trauma specialist, survivor. Someone who'd faced the worst the world could throw at her and refused to break. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and acting anyway. It was about falling and getting back up. It was about being knocked down so hard you thought you'd never stand again, and then standing anyway because people were counting on you. The ER called her back. Another patient. Another chance to make a difference. Emily turned away from the mirror and walked back into the controlled chaos, back into the work that gave her life meaning, back into the fight that never really ended but was always worth fighting. She'd been dismissed once, mocked, pushed aside and nearly erased. But she was still here, still standing, still saving lives, and no one would ever make her invisible again.